Please go ahead and proceed when you're ready, Senator Romero.
Good morning. I am here to present Senate Bill 4. It is a bill that we are asking, of course, to be before you in order to respond, race to the top, answering the call of President Obama to the nation in order to begin to ensure that California is ready, is eligible, and most importantly, competitive in this race to the nation competition in which we find ourselves. Let me begin by saying that, as you know, we have been here once before. It has been an arduous process. It has been a very invigorating process. I am very encouraged by all the voices that we have heard chiming in with respect to what we should do in order to answer the call from President Obama to engage in the race to the nation. I know many of you have been engaged in long hours of negotiations. I want to thank, all those who have, whether one opposed or supported, came forth with ideas. This is a fight for public education, and public education, as you know, I believe, is the civil rights issue of our time. More importantly, it's the key to the American dream. It's what makes us equal. It is worth having a healthy dialogue and debate over. This morning, I come forward to present a bill. As you know, SB 1 was moved out of this House. It was not adopted by the Assembly. AB 8 was sent back. However, the author has asked to pull AB 8 from consideration. This followed, of course, many hours and days of discussion and negotiation. We have responded with Senate Bill 4. And Senate Bill 4, I believe, makes great strides, great progress. We are not totally in consensus between the two houses, and this is a democracy. Each house has its voice and its say. But I believe where we are today certainly reflects that we have struggled and reflected on the issues before us and the challenges that face us. So I want to take some time to go through where we have struck common ground. And much that we find in this common ground, I believe, actually strengthens us in terms of our application. It's something that we should acknowledge and celebrate, I believe. Having said that, I'm going to put on my reading glasses at this point because the print is small. Okay, what do we do? And I want to break it up into 4 different elements that are in Senate Bill 4. The first thing is that I'm going to go through the common ground. A lot of issues where the leadership of the Assembly, the leadership of the Senate, those of us who have been negotiating, we have come to consensus that these issues go forward, we agree on. Let me just delineate what these are. First of all, in Senate Bill 4, it recognizes that we will execute a plan for race to the top that, as I said, makes us eligible and makes us competitive. What the plan does is it authorizes the Superintendent of Public Instruction and the President of the State Board of Education to enter into agreements with local school districts that wish to participate in Race to the Top. Remember, what we are doing is empowering, enabling local education agencies to say, count us in. We want to do it. Yes, we can. This plan also, as written in SB 4, or the authorization, it requires the Superintendent of Public Instruction, the State Board of Education, and the Governor to collaborate on a plan to submit as part of California's Race to the Top application. How do we focus? We know that the President and Secretary Arne Duncan have highlighted the toughest assignment. This is, of course, combating and challenging the lowest performing schools, the chronically lowest performing schools in the nation. And I know, as you've seen me with this scroll over and over, this scroll, it's not a diploma. One day it will be. This scroll has the names of 571 schools in California today today that have been on the watch list for a minimum of 7 years, some of them as many as 10 years. This is what our focus on the lowest performing schools has to address with these schools. What does it do? We have come to consensus, we have come to agreement that we will intervene in these persistently lowest performing schools. The bill authorizes in the plan to identify for significant intervention the bottom 5% of all schools in federal program improvement, plus all high schools with graduation rates below 60% in each of the past 3 years. It also, the plan, provides discretion to the Superintendent of Public Instruction and the State Board of Education to exclude juvenile court schools, special education schools, county community schools, community day schools, and schools that have demonstrated academic growth over 5 years. An additional part of where we've come to agreement on and can move forward is that we strengthen academic standards and assessments. We establish an Academic Content Standards Commission appointed by the Governor, the Assembly, and the Senate to develop new, internationally benchmarked content standards in English and math that build toward college and career readiness by the time of high school graduation. 85% of these standards shall be Common Core academic standards as required by Race to the Top. We state the intention to transitions to assessments that are valid, reliable, fair, and aligned to standards, and that measure student growth over time, consistent with Race to the Top guidelines. It strengthens teachers and principals. It affirms that California student and teacher data systems may be used by local districts subject to collective bargaining to evaluate teachers and principals. In addition, where we come to agreement in is that we emphasize STEM, science, technology, engineering, and math, and college and career readiness. It creates new credential pathways for aspiring STEM and CTE teachers. It directs the Superintendent of Public Instruction to recommend ways to emphasize science, technology, engineering, and mathematics, career and college readiness in the school accountability system. It strengthens our data system. It allows us to link workforce data to our systems of K through 12 and higher education so that we can better assess the impact of education on employment and earnings of former students in those systems. Members, this is where we've had the negotiation. A lot of this is technicalese, crossing T's, dotting I's. It is substantive, it is thorough, it makes us eligible, competitive. This is where both houses, members, we've said after it feels like years, but after many, many hours, days, weeks, honestly, of negotiation, we've come to agreement. The Assembly, the Senate, we're on the same page. A second part of where we are in Senate Bill 4, the question of charter schools. I certainly heard when we presented before the committee there are a great variety of opinions on charter schools, on the level of accountability that we have right now, whereas some might call it oversight, others may call it strangulation over regulation. There was a difference of opinion, very profound differences between the Assembly and the Senate. What we have done in agreement between the Assembly and the Senate is to say we are going to remove the question of charters, the cap, from the bill completely. It is out of Senate Bill 4. I personally would have liked to have seen the lifting of the charter cap in California to respond to the call of President Obama. But let me say this. When the final regulations were drafted for Race to the Top, we sort of look at it and believe that the regulations were drafted in a way that kept an eye out for California, because the truth is California is well ahead of the nation in having a very open and progressive policy on the growth of charter schools in California. We will not lose a point On the charter school issue, we will not gain a point on the charter school issue. Where we are today is we are far below the cap as it is right now in California. So with all parties at the table, we did not come to consensus. We moved that out of this House. This was an issue that was not accepted in the Assembly. So where we are today is going back and forth, looking at the final regs. We said, no harm, no foul, take it out of the bill completely. So that question is gone. And I want to emphasize in the final regulations, we feel that they were drafted actually for a state that has over the years been very solid in moving forth on charter schools and allowing growth. Okay, that's the charter school, and there's again too, like I said, consensus. We're on the same page on those issues. Two more issues, and this is where we start having a little bit more of a discussion. The third major issue is what we call the parent trigger for school renewal. I don't know if all of us, but many of us are parents. I know for me, I often say, my mother, she had a 6th grade education. I'm sitting here today with a PhD. Education matters. My mother fought for me. I believe that parents, when we talk about responsibilities, as we should, we cannot talk about responsibilities and talk about responsibility of parents if we don't give parents rights. Parents, after all, are the ones we turn to pass the bonds so we can build the schools. Parents are the ones who pay the taxes to keep the lights on. Parents are the one who trust us with their children, their most valuable asset and resource, and they have a dream that their children will succeed. So what do we do with the parent trigger? And you'll hear more from this. I want to give an overview, but you'll hear from this on witnesses in support of this issue. And let me just say, we have not reached a consensus with the Assembly, but I think we have made tremendous progress on this issue. Essentially, the parent trigger that is in Senate Bill 4 is the same as it was in Senate Bill 1. There isn't a difference on that matter. It's what we passed out of Senate Bill 1. It is, though, what we limited in Senate Bill 4 is we make a maximum of 75 schools that can be transformed via the parent trigger across a 2-year time frame. So that is the only difference between Senate Bill 1 and Senate Bill 4. It is, we limit it to 75 schools. There was concern saying, how do we know if this works? Maybe we should test it, etc. I'm okay with that. And so we limited to 75 schools. 75 schools is still a huge number of schools. Just to remind you on the parent trigger, we took that out? Yeah, just the 75. Okay, I've just been passed this note. We did take out the 2-year limit. Okay, so it is only the 75 schools. 75 schools, there's not the limit. I apologize. So that's the only difference, the 75 schools. Okay, what does it do? Just to refresh your memory, what this means, remember the issue where parents wanted to get involved was because oftentimes when you would take a list of the schools over and over, there was a great deal of frustration. You'd have, schools over and over sitting on the watch list. Nothing would happen. And so it would basically be, over the years, like I said, some of these schools have been here for at least 10 years. I found one of my former schools on this list. Garfield High School in my district has been on the watch list for 10 years. And we all saw the movie Stand and Deliver years ago. It's on the list. Minimum 7 years. So parents have said, trust us to be partners in the process of transformation. I call this the shoe leather empowerment of parents. And what it does is basically tells parents, good old-fashioned democracy, you have the right. You have the right to petition your government. And who is your government? Your school board, who you elected to represent you. You have the right in the schools that have been, underperforming. If you get a signature, old-fashioned petition, 50% of the schools 50% of the parents in these schools and or 50% of the feeder schools, you have the right to be able to tell the school board, do something, and the school board must. That's really all that it is. That's the parent trigger, but it is a powerful voice, and parents are stepping up. You might have heard me on the floor of the Senate. I acknowledged a couple of parents from what they call themselves the parent revolution. For anybody who lives in L.A. County, there is a parents' movement that is brewing, and I'm very honored and proud to march alongside with them. I'm just going to stipulate that. They will speak more if you have questions when they come forward. That's the third piece. As I indicated, there's not sign-off there, but there's been, I think, very good discussion on the parent piece. The final piece of Senate Bill 4 is probably the most controversial. Okay, it's the most controversial piece. I feel, however, it is a significant piece. We talked about parent rights. I call this sort of the 1-2 punch for parents. They have the right to walk, to collect petitions, and they have a right finally to say, this is my child, and I'm going to do what I need for my child to get the best education. Let me just explain it. And I want to thank Senator Huff, because it's been Senator Huff who has, in this legislature and in this Senate, championed this issue. And I have been proud to, as I've learned about open enrollment, that this is something where if we trust our parents, let our parents do the right thing for their children. What is it? And let me just explain very quickly. What does open enrollment mean? Quite simply, you've heard me speak about this in the past. Zip code, geography. If you live in a certain neighborhood, this is your school. Well, that may be well and fine, but what happens if you're a parent in a school that's on this list? It's been there for 7 years, 10 years. We define by turf. What open enrollment says is essentially, you could look at a number of ways, the free market. Let the customer vote. Shoe leather. I'm going to vote with my feet. I'm going to take my child and find another school into which I can enroll in public education. And I shouldn't have to be affluent to pay for a private school. I should be able to say, let me just take my child. Also, as well, in looking at this, it gives the right to the parent. President Obama, I'll go back to him. Remember, he said, we must be willing to take drastic steps when our schools are failing. Open enrollment provides a part of the competitive edge that we will need to produce a strong and vibrant and bold application. Okay, and let me just say on open enrollment, to first set the stage as well. Open enrollment is bold for California. We've never done it. But you know what? 18 other states in the nation already have open enrollment. 18 other states. Let me read who the states are, because it's important. It's east, west, north, south. Ohio and Colorado. For those of us interested in presidential politics, those are critical swing states. Ohio and Colorado have passed open enrollment. This was done under a democratically controlled legislatures. Other states: Alaska, Arizona, Connecticut, Delaware, Florida, Indiana, Kansas, Michigan, Minnesota, Mississippi, Missouri, Montana, South Carolina, Texas, Virginia, West Virginia. Today, they have open enrollment. And starting next year, Wisconsin will be starting open enrollment. That's 19 states in the nation by January. We have the opportunity to be the 20th state. And I want to emphasize it. We would be the 20th state. It's not a radical notion. It's a bold notion for California. And it simply goes back to the premise, the kid is the parents. And let the parent just simply have a choice to say, not even an obligation, but I can choose to take my child and find the best place for them. Parents can go shopping in any shopping mall. They can worship in the church of their choice. But when it comes to schools, we say, you live in that neighborhood, you're there. End of story. And I will tell you, in my neighborhood, another place where sometimes we have geography is destiny, I live in, quite frankly, gang neighborhood, as it's called. 18th Street gang, quite frankly. Okay, I understand what geography means when somebody says it's your turf and you don't cross the line. And I have seen kids in my neighborhood, they've been killed by gang violence. Another one, his cousin grew up to be a union organizer. Another one today is serving in Iraq. My daughter, who grew up, again, too, in, as we used to say, gang neighborhood, she's today graduate, master's, working in New York. I fought for my daughter the way my mother fought for me. And that's all this says with open enrollment. Now, there are many questions. Let me go through it. I know, Senator Simitian, you have a list of questions, and I'm going to ask other folks to come up because I know you're very precise. We want every question answered for you.
That was very politely put, Senator.
Thank you so much. I'm trying to be very polite, sir. Let me just go through. First of all, if I can say, on open enrollment, as I said, Senator Huff has led the way. We actually, this committee passed a much stronger version of open enrollment out of this committee. We did this on April 29th, and this was before Race to the Top. That was Senate Bill 266, I think it was. What that bill did was it said, we're going to grant open enrollment opportunities for parents in the lowest 3 deciles in California. 7-0. Senator Padilla, you voted for it. Senator Simitian, you voted for it. It went out 7-zip out of committee. When the president made the call for Race to the Top, we brought back this idea as part of our competitive edge. And we put in the same as we passed it out of committee. Today it's back just the lowest decile, just one. Just give us one and let parents begin to have the opportunity. Race to the Top was formally announced July 24th. We used what we did in this committee in April as a template for Senate Bill 1. It's back in Senate Bill 4. But remember, even in quite frankly, a weaker version than what this committee already passed out. The questions have been asked twofold: the receiving district and the sending district. What happens in these cases? And I'm going to start just delineating, and then we'll go through with Jeannie. I'm going to ask Jeannie Oropeza to please step forward to answer specific questions. And there's been good dialogue, good debate on this issue. First of all, the receiving district. The question was asked on a receiving district. Can a receiving district refuse to accept a student into the district? Remember, it triggers with the parent saying, I'm in the lowest decile in the state of California. I am taking my child, and I'm going to try to find a district. You know, this holiday season, we might say, is there any room at the inn? Think about it in holiday terms, perhaps. I'm going to take my child and go looking. I knock on the door. Do you have any room in your school system? The receiving district has the right to say no. Let me repeat that. The receiving district has the right to say, sorry, there is no room at the inn. Good luck. However, the receiving district must tell us why. But they set the standards. They determine the capacity. They can refuse on the basis of capacity based on their finances. Because we're not going to strangle a receiving district. That district, and who is the district? Their superintendent. They're elected board members. They decide the policy that says, these are our financial constraints, and this is what, if we do this, we can accept so many, or otherwise, but they set the policy. We don't. So the only thing is, because it's public education and the public is the public, none of us would condone discrimination on the basis of race or religion or sexual orientation. I mean, we wouldn't condone it. Special education, the district can say no. You just have to tell us why and be consistent. That's all this says. So the receiving district retains their right. What does the district get? It gets ADA. And in this era of declining enrollment, many districts are saying, we want to have another student. It's ADA. It could be 7,000. It could, whatever. So how many students? The district itself determines its destiny. The receiving district can say, we could maybe take 3 kids. Maybe I can take 17 kids. We're not telling them. The receiving school board says up front, for this year, we can take so many kids. It's their choice. They tell us what it is.
Senator, excuse the interruption through the chair. Would this be a good time to ask questions, or would you like me to wait?
If I can just finish this and then we can go through, if you would mind. But because I just want to emphasize a couple of points here. And so remember, the receiving district, when they make a choice to say, maybe I'll take 17 kids, maybe I'll take 3 kids, the receiving district has already funded its programs for that year. They've paid for the principal. They may have paid for the bus route. They maybe they've already paid for the lights to function. It's their choice now. Do I take or do I not? Just tell us why. Okay, let me go forth then on the sending district. Okay, what about the sending? The sending district is the district where the child resides because of zip code. The parent says, you know what, I'm just going to go see if I can find another district. Okay, so the sending district, and it's not mandatory, it's an option for parents. It's a choice for parents in public education to take your child and put them into another public school system. Okay, that's the issue there. What does it mean? Well, first of all, when we take a look at it, each sending district will have to make its adjustments. Absolutely. They'll have to make their adjustments. They have 1 year. In the first year, there is no change. There is no change that first year. And they essentially have a year to adjust. What does it mean? The sending district still keeps, I mean, they still get their Title I funding. They have their money overall. Maybe you'll see an empty chair in the classroom. But they retain their money. Title I dollars as well, quite frankly, it's kept because Title I is based on census data, so they keep that. Okay, and I'll jump forward as well. The question is, somebody asked me, well, what if every kid leaves? What if every parent says, my kids are out of here? You know what? I'd say, Houston, we have a bigger problem, and that's why we're here today. That's a bigger problem that we would have to address. But you know what? At that point that I would say then, and part of what we're doing in Race to the Top is holding school management accountable. The adults who run the system to say, if every parent were to say, I'm gone, honestly, that's a bigger problem. It could happen. I don't think we should be afraid. I think we'd have to hear that message from parents. All right, so others say, well, you might be labeling the sending district as failing. The point is, from the president, take drastic steps when our schools are failing. Quite frankly, in New York, grades are given, A through F. So what I would say, in going back to this, is in crafting open enrollment, it is a reasonable measure that has been adopted or will be in practice by 19 states in the nation by next year. We would be number 20th. We've limited to the lowest decile in California. We have many to choose from. We've limited. It simply says, parents, these are your kids. Your child's not a debit card. It's not an ATM machine. School adults have to respond. And I would go back to it in concluding so that you can ask questions. I will go back to say it's an opportunity for all parents. White, black, Latino, Asian, it's an opportunity for, but we've limited it to the lowest decile. It is a civil rights issue. And I would just remind us, as we get ready to celebrate the birthday of Dr. Martin Luther King next January, just a couple of days away from the deadline for when Race to the Top application is due, to look at the history of California. We all talk about Brown versus Board of Education. We all quote it with all deliberate speed. And the irony that remains is that Brown versus Board of Education was based on what happened in California, not just once but twice. 1930s Lemon Grove, outside Senator Weiland's area. Lemon Grove. And that was about the argument of Mexican kids stay in Mexican schools on your side of the tracks. That was what they called the Lemon Grove incident. Maybe you've read the history. Maybe even more sadly, we haven't. 1930s. Flash forward a decade. 1940s. The Mendes case, Westminster, California. Once again, separate and unequal. Lemon Grove and Westminster. Those are the philosophical and legal and constitutional foundations that gave rise to what I believe is the most profound court case in this nation on education, Brown versus Board of Education. And we're back in 2009. We have more than an achievement gap. We have an education crisis. We have a president of the country calling and asking for change. We have a moment in time to stand and deliver. We've come to great consensus. There have been arguments. There have been good debate. It's been honest. It's been real. It's been from the heart. We'll continue to have the discussion. I respectfully ask you to please pass this bill forward so that we can proudly submit our Race to the Top application and win not just possibly $700 million for our kids, but to put a stamp and a seal that we have a vision for fairness and equality in public education for all. I respectfully ask for an aye vote, and we'll take questions, and we've got
Here's
the
what I'd like to
experts.
do is this time we'll open it up for member questions. We'll get that answered, and then we'll go to witnesses in favor, witnesses against, and then bring it back for final wrap-up, okay? So if anybody wants to holler, I know Senator Sumida, you have some questions. The rest of you just let me know.
Yeah, and Mr. Chair, I appreciate your desire to move us along, and I know we're all anxious to do this quickly.
Take your time.
We've got some challenges today, and I part of my questioning has
Not
to go
that much time.
with process. We've got some challenges today. Let me just ask a process question first. I don't believe we have an analysis of the bill prepared by committee staff. Is that correct? We've got a fact sheet, but I don't think we have committee analysis. All right, we don't. Do we expect one? That's the next question. We don't know. We have 29 pages of new language, and these are not criticisms. These are just challenges in terms of making sure we do a workmanlike job on an important issue that has long-lasting consequences. So we've got 29 pages, and you know the difficulty that I'm facing, Senator, is when I voted for the Huff bill, when I voted for the Romero bill, those were first committee, House of Origin, understanding that they would work their way through the process. And I've certainly asked for some accommodation over the years when I've had a bill in my first committee in the House of Origin as we move forward. The hope and expectation I think that we all had was that when the bill got to the Assembly, there would be an effort there to find common ground. And, of course, I know what happened to your bill in the Assembly. I spent some time there myself that day, as you'll recall. So on this bill, is it the expectation that this bill will be amended in the Assembly, since it is now a Senate product, and come back to us one more time? Or is it the expectation that this is the bill, that whatever compromise there was to be worked out has been worked out and it is reflected in this bill?
Senator Sumida, first let me go to the question of the analysis. In reality, while we don't have a committee analysis on this particular version, because we were waiting until this morning to find out if the amendments would have been accepted by Assembly Member Brownlee. We heard this morning that she had decided to pull the bill. On the questions of the four issues, we have seen that argument. It's been included in these are not new issues at all.
Well, but it's a new, excuse me, respectfully, it is a new bill, and as I understand it, it has some pieces from the old Romero bill, some pieces from the Brownlee bill, and some pieces from the Huff bill. Now, it sounds to me like that's been a really good effort to try and pull some of this together.
If I could just insert, the Huff bill portion was already included in the joint SB1 that we put out before. Yeah.
So there's really just two bills.
Including all of the protections on open enrollment issues?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, it's identical to the SB 5X1.
So,
with the exception that it's decile 1 now instead of 1, 2, 3.
Only difference.
So it's exactly the same, except it is different. Okay, so
Well, it would move.
We limited it.
Exactly.
all right,
we
so,
limited
no, I
it.
understand that, but that's a change. So what I've got is I've got a document in front of me with no analysis that reflects the best of three bills in the judgment of the author, and so now.
Senator Smith, I think honestly, and again, too, I would not mislead you. I made
Folks,
reference to Senator
Senator,
Huff
please no.
as a preface, but it really
Please.
it's two bills.
Okay. I don't know that because I haven't had a chance to read the bill, and I don't have professional committee analysis. So my point is we've got some process challenges, and the question I asked is, do we expect this bill to be kicked back to the Assembly with amendments there, or is it our expectation that this really is the final bill? That's my question.
Let me indicate that it is a process. This is, again, I think it forges as much of a compromise as we were able to do. It does go process-wise. If we can move it through, it provides us an opportunity to go back to the Assembly. The Assembly will have an opportunity once again to debate this vehicle in Assembly Education Committee. So we will go back again. And they will have their full debate in Assembly Education, appropriations, and on the floor. It would then have to come back to the Senate once again for concurrence.
If it's been amended, and it may be amended, but it may not. So I don't know. Okay. So I think the answer to that question, as I hear it, is we don't know because we can't speak for what the Assembly plans to do on the bill. So this may be the final version, or it may be subject to further amendment. All right. There was reference under the open enrollment provision to financial impact being one of the bases on which a receiving district, or the district of enrollment, as that term of art is used in the bill, can be a criteria in the standards. Could someone cite me a page number and tell me where that language is that allows financial impact to be a consideration?
Financial impact, but there's protections for capacity programs, so you can look at how many teachers you have in the building.
What page is that?
45. General Pace of Department of Finance. So if you look on page 4 of the bill, in section 48356, where it talks about the capacity of program, class, grade level, school buildings, all of that is all linked to fiscal conditions. So if I do not have sufficient...
Respectfully, that's why I asked the question.
Right.
The language that is in the bill makes no reference that I could find on 15 minutes notice to financial impact. It makes reference to capacity.
Right.
It's entirely possible that somebody has capacity in their district but would have an adverse fiscal impact by receiving students. Now, that's a policy judgment that the author and the administration need to make about what they want their bill to do. But right now, I don't see the language, unless you can point me to a different paragraph, that says financial impact.
And I think that from a fiscal perspective, if they have capacity and they're adding more students, that means they have enough chairs in their classroom. They will only benefit from that because they'll get additional revenue limit money for that
We'll get
child.
to that in a minute. But if they're spending $10,000 a kid and they're only going to get $5,000 a kid, even if they have the capacity, they may say that's an adverse financial impact. Now, the question is, the author specifically said 15 minutes ago that financial impact was a basis on which the decision could be made by the local district.
Right.
The language isn't there, and I'm asking, is it anywhere else in the bill?
Right. And I think from our perspective, the key word is the capacity of the program. And if I am spending $10,000 to operate my program and I'm only going to get $5,000 or $6,000 per pupil, then that means I will not accept the student, because that's my fiscal determination on whether or not I can afford to take the additional child.
Ms. Oropesa,
Right.
again, it's not what it says.
Well-
This is not a particularly subtle issue. I mean, money is not the same as space. That's pretty clear. The language in the bill says capacity. It doesn't say financial impact.
Program capacity, and programs are funded with resources, and so the capacity in my program is driven by whether or not I can operate that program, which is tied back to the fiscal condition of the district. I think we just seem to agree to disagree in whether or not that means fiscal. From a Department of Finance perspective, all programs are operated if there's sufficient fiscal resources to operate them, or you don't have a program.
Well, then I would ask you and the author to think, as we have the conversation today, whether you'd be willing to accept amendment language that specifically called out financial impact in just that language, because that's not what capacity
I
I
means.
think we have another
yeah.
clarification over here
I don't
also
see
that
a-
we probably ought to hear from.
Mr. Chairman, Bill Lucia with Ed Voice. To flesh out a little bit more on the answer, the sentence that you're looking at there, Senator Simidian, it also tries to specifically distinguish the issue of program in this notion of capacity fiscally. It includes class and grade level, because the anticipation of recognizing that there are collective bargaining agreements that talk about in some cases, like in a secondary class, you can only have 32 teachers teaching math. And so that creates a capacity issue that's directly tied to fiscal constraint and whether you have the opportunity or not with that marginal student to hire, if you would need to have to hire an additional teacher. And specifically to your point, is distinguishing the notion of capacity in terms of physical space, bricks and mortar, and seats, because it says, or school building. So read in harmony, it's absolutely the intent. And again, I think you heard from the author that the recipient district's decision-making process in terms of identifying how many slots they have available absolutely would take into account their capacity to maintain the quality and the standard of the program that they believe locally is what they want to sustain.
Here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to, for the moment, I'm going to take yes for an answer in terms of the willingness to accept language that would specifically call out financial impact. But just to be clear, it doesn't say that, it doesn't say anything even remotely like that, and that's why we need to have language like financial impact, if in fact that's the intention of the author and the administration. There was reference to the fact that the receiving district would receive ADA for the youngster. Could somebody tell me where in the 29 pages that is?
Sorry, what's...
There was reference by the author to the fact that the receiving district, the district of enrollment as it is now termed, I believe, by the language of the bill, would receive ADA. Could you tell me where that language is in the bill?
So under current law, not in this bill, under current law, districts maintain accounting in terms of attendance, average daily attendance. When those students enroll in the school, those students will be counted as part of their attendance records, and that's how they say, here's the bill for our attendance, and so these students would count in that total. The district that loses a student will have a 1-year protection because they get declining enrollment, and you probably all know this already, but that's how
as you know, Ms. Oropez, there are probably 10% of our districts around the state now are what we refer to as basic aid districts. Typically, they receive 70% rather than the full 100%.
Right.
Do we know that that's the case if we're talking about open enrollment? I don't see a provision to that effect.
So the bill that was recently signed by the governor permits districts to identify themselves as district of choice. If you look at the list of the districts that have done that, designated themselves as choice, the majority of those are basic aid districts. So if a district were in some way not receiving benefit because they're basic aid districts, they could simply designate themselves districts of choice, and they would receive the 70% funding like they do under that program and the
But
old
now
DSIC
you've required
programs.
them to designate themselves as a district of choice in order to get the ADA that a moment ago you told me they would get as a matter of law.
I said if they track the ADA in there, and we hadn't distinguished between basic aid and non-basic aid. Now you've asked a specific question about that, and I'm saying there's an option under current law to do that.
No, hang on. We're talking about open enrollment. You're talking about districts of choice. So now you're telling me that in order to be compensated as an open enrollment district of enrollment who is receiving a student, that a district will have to make the determination to be a district of choice in order to get the revenue limit that should be forthcoming. This is the issue that was raised. Let me finish, please. This is the issue that was raised in the assembly analysis of the earlier version of Senator Romero's bill. I'm going to read you directly, not my opinion, but the opinion of the Assembly Education Committee. Quote, the District of Choice, DOC program, currently authorizes a basic aid district to receive 70% of the state revenue limit for average daily attendance that otherwise would have gone to the district of residence when they enroll a pupil from another district. This funding mechanism is missing from the open enrollment program. That's not my judgment. That is the judgment of the Assembly Education Committee staff analysis on the provision. So absent a different provision, I'm trying to get clear how we can ensure that the district receives some compensation. And you're telling me the only way they can do that is if they want to take the further step of being a district.
A way that they can do that on their own now under current law is to designate themselves districts of choice.
In which case I would ask the author if she's willing to put a provision in this bill that calls that out specifically as being the same compensation in open enrollment without telling 100 school districts in the state that they have to make themselves districts of choice whether they want to or not.
I think we have to take that back. That is an additional fiscal restraint that right now is not as part of
Ms.
federal
Oropeza,
law.
I don't understand
I'm
how
not-
it can be an additional fiscal restraint if a moment ago you told me they were all going to be able to access those funds.
No, you asked me how those students get counted in the receiving funding, and then you asked me another question that was specific to basic aid, and so now we're having that discussion about
That's
that.
10% of the districts in the state. That's not a small group.
And I would just point out, I think it's something that we will take back and get you an answer on. But I will point out that there's nothing in the Constitution and nothing in state law that requires the property taxes in a district to not fund students from another district if they're attending that district. It requires the property tax money, to fund the schools in that area, but it does not restrict who can attend that area. So we're talking about different issues here, and we just need to take it back. Not to say that we've never made that decision, and in the past we have. I just need to take it back.
You're losing me fast here. The next issue is that the author indicated that the district has the right to say no. I don't actually find that in the bill, again, during the limited time I've had to look at the bill. What I find is that a school district of enrollment may adopt specific standards. That then raises the question, if somebody disagrees with the decision of the school district, what is the standard by which that gets based if people then bring suit against the district?
There actually is, under current law, an appeal process for intra-district process. So the first step, if a parent gets rejected, is they can go through the appeal process. And then
And let me just interrupt and ask, how do we know that that process is the process that applies to open enrollment, which is not currently the law? So we've got an existing process, which works for inter-district transfer, but presumably we're creating open enrollment because that's different than inter-district transfer. So how do we know that's the process?
It's inter and intra-district transfer, so we view it as expanding the program broadly.
Okay. But is there any language in the bill that indicates that is the appeal process that is used for a dispute? Look, I mean, I've been an advocate for parental choice for 25 years. I mentioned I supported the two bills earlier, and I've always been an advocate for parental choice because I think it's in the interest of the kid. I think it's healthy to have the competition, and frankly, I think it's our inoculation against vouchers. But you have to make this stuff work. My closing comments when we had the hearing a month and a half ago was, if we're going to do this, then it's got to be done right. It's got to be done in a way that works, or a good idea will turn this place ass over tea kettle upside down, and this will be the end of any notion about trying to give kids and their parents more choices. So now I'm being told that there's an appeal process that applies to interdistrict transfers, but we've got something now called open enrollment. It's not clear to me how that issue gets resolved. So if the system works the way the author, I think, hopes it will work, and kids say, you know what, we're going to exercise our right to get out of here and go to another district, and a district turns them down, somebody's going to file suit against those other 90% of the school districts in the state that all of us represent. And then there's going to be an issue about who gets to decide and what is the standard. So, and my recollection, and maybe we need ledge counsel on this, is that because school boards are not legislative bodies as commonly thought of, but as they are entities that are creatures of the state, that the usual legislative deference that would go to a city council or a board of supervisors is not accorded in lawsuits that deal with school boards. So that raises an important question, which is, what is the standard? Is it a determination that something is arbitrary and capricious? Does there need to be clear and convincing evidence? Is it the preponderance? Is it the same standard as legislative deference? If the interdistrict transfer process is the one that works, then we ought to know that by having language in the bill that says that, it seems to me. But then I would be asking the same questions about how does that standard work at present, and what costs does that entail, and what are the implications if that suddenly affects 10% of the state's students? Because now you're talking about a pretty big number. Because I don't find it in the bill anywhere that, in fact, the district has the right to say no. I find in the bill.
Senator Smitty, on page 4, 48356A, first line, a school district of enrollment may adopt specific written standards for acceptance and rejection of applications pursuant to this article.
And that says they get to adopt standards. And then the question is, what happens if somebody disagrees with their application of those standards?
And if you look at subdivision B, it further says that it's the same rules that apply when a district determines whether or not to accept schools in gifted or magnet type programs. So
No, that's not what it says, Ms.
would be this-
Ms. Oropesa, please stop. It doesn't say that, does it? It says that this non-resident school district may apply.
Right.
May apply.
And when you combine it with them being able to adopt the specific reasons for acceptance or rejection, it's, as Senator Romero indicated, the governing board that makes that decision, and they may use the same rules that they apply when they accept or reject students in other programs.
Could they apply more rigorous standards if they wanted to, since it says may and not shall?
I think that's up to the local board. The way our bill's written, with all due respect.
It's permissive.
And again, what is the appeal process, and what is the cost associated with the appeal process, and what is the basis for the determination if somebody ends up in court?
I can tell you under current law, in terms of the current appeal process and how that works, the state currently pays for a mandate that creates a structure to ensure when there are appeals that students have and the parents have due process. The cost varies depending on how many appeals there are in the situations, but when we last looked at that, it was roughly $6 million statewide, and that's something we're already paying for.
Except now we're going to have 600,000 students in the bottom decile who are eligible to participate in the program. I believe the Department of Finance refers to this as cost pressure in the dealings I've had, yes?
If we see rejections, if there are no rejections, then we may not see any cost pressure. We don't know. We just don't know the final result.
So now we're talking about an assumption in which there are no rejections anywhere in the state for 600,000 students?
We don't know. We don't even know if all 600,000 will move.
If the district has to litigate, who bears that cost?
The district does.
Okay. So just to be clear, the bill does not say financial impact. The bill does not indicate how we ensure ADA does, in fact, go to all districts who would be receiving students unless they want to declare themselves districts of choice. And the bill does not provide a standard in terms of the district's ability to say no. It simply provides that they can adopt standards, but then anyone can contest the actual application of the standards either by litigation or by appeal process. Okay. In my view, those are serious concerns, and that's just on the open enrollment provision.
I'm just going to add that Senator Simitian, on some of the language we respectfully disagree. A rose is a rose by any other name. You say financial, we say capacity. There are different issues here. There are statutes in law that don't have to be in this particular bill. I said we was amenable to looking at, if you want to spell out financial, give us some language. But in looking at it, though, I think this goes
Senator,
back...
with all due respect, it's been 6 weeks since we had the bill, and it's not up to me to give you language for your bill to make financial impact clear. It's up to you at this point to bring us a bill that speaks to those issues.
Senator Simitian, again, too, when we go forth through committee, we are saying we're working on what's before us. But let's continue let's not have the argument, I think, on this issue. I think, though, that what I started overall was to go back to it. Are we looking at kids as ATM cards? And I think there's some fundamental issues here, quite frankly. Who are those kids? Are we looking at kids as, because we can, and quite frankly, we do. And you know what? Maybe sometimes we should. 571 schools on this list. We're talking about the lowest decile in the state of California, 19 other states. I think we can work through the financial issues, but I'm also going to talk about, when we talk about cost pressure, then let's start adding in building prison cells. Let's start adding jail beds. Let's start adding in foster care system. Let's start adding in welfare. Because if we want to add cost pressure, what is the cost to California for us leading the nation, soaring to the top, remaining at the top on the number of dropouts that we produce in the state of California? 86% of the kids on this list are high poverty, and they're children of color. I'm going to just simply say we can have the argument about how much does it cost my district, and let's have that. But I'm also going to turn it around because I think this is a moment where we're seeing parents saying, the public saying, if we believe in a public school system, come one, come all. Give me you're tired and you're hungry. And what we're asking for is a hunger for education. I see these parents out there. I live in a gang neighborhood. Come on over to my neighborhood. My postal clerk saw me and he goes, you still live here? And then he thought maybe he had offended me. Yeah, I still live here. Because I've seen the families and I've seen the kids. And I've seen the corpses as well. Trust me, I've seen the bodies covered of kids killed because of gang violence because they're trapped by zip code. So I don't believe in discrimination. I want us to succeed, but I am going to start. I can start by the ATM card, or I can start by saying education is the key to the American dream with all deliberate speed. I just think we may not agree on the language. And Senator Simitian, I look forward to working with you on language. I really do, because this is the intent. And if 19 other states in the nation can figure it out, by golly, in the Golden State, we can too.
And Mr. Chairman, I'll close with this for this point in the conversation. That was certainly my hope when I voted for the Huff bill. That was certainly my hope when I voted for the Romero bill. And the children we say we care about deserve us doing a quality job that actually works for them, because we cannot say we care about them, we cannot say we want the best for them, and then turn out work product that doesn't deliver the goods. Words won't get it done. We need real product that help real kids. And right now, I don't think we're there.
Thank you, Senator. Senator Liu had a question or comment.
I just maybe toned down the atmosphere just a little bit. It's not comic relief. But, we all are, I think we're all in agreement for the need of this state to move forward to address the needs of our most neediest students and to really move for reform on these schools who are non-performing. However, the detail needs to be, I've always had problems with open enrollment because for me, it's like class size reduction. These things sound good, but unless you really work on language to make sure it really functions well, then it's just too helter-skelter. And so we're concerned about, I am concerned about the language, not the intent, but the language of this concept of open enrollment. If other states are doing it, why are they doing it? Have they had success doing it? Have their kids improved? So what is, just because somebody else is doing it doesn't make it right for California. So, it has much more to do with, and Senator Simitian is correct, we all want to address the needs of these students. It is a civil rights issue, but we don't want to make errors that compound problems for our already beleaguered school districts in the state of California.
Any other questions of the author on this before we move on to other statements of support and opposition? Yes, Senator Wyland.
In support of the bill, it seems to me that over time we've done lots and lots and lots of legislation that it turned out subsequently needed fixes, needed addressing. In this case, we've talked about financial considerations that might come up. The reality is that very few parents unfortunately, will actually exercise this option, in my experience. Very, very few. Those who would be inclined to would be struggling to get their children into a charter school. They would be struggling to get their kids into a special class in the lower performing school. It's unfortunately a small subset. And so much has been made of this, far more really than it warrants. It's too bad. There was an experiment in New York many years ago in one of their sub-districts where they did this, and the word got out, and it worked. This is just one tiny element of a bill that has all kinds of things in it to actually improve the learning and life prospects of students that, we use these platitudes that we can't afford to lose them. Somehow we have to go beyond the concerns of associations who are concerned that, and bringing up issues that before they would have no concern about. And this is everywhere. This isn't just East L.A. Look at my district. People think, oh, this is this, wealthy Republican district. Go to Escondido, where I was on the school board. Go to San Marcos. Go to Vista. Go to Oceanside. They are predominantly children of color, in this case, mostly Latino. Big numbers come to school not speaking English. It's a lot of those parents are not going to have the sophistication to move them to another school. It would be good if they did. They aren't. They're not going to have the transportation to. We should let this be. This is not a bad thing, and it's not a bad thing when Senator Simitian voted for it before. The real challenge is all the other stuff to fix those schools. That's the real challenge. The real challenge is a vice principal in one of my schools who happens to be Latino, who tells me his biggest struggle is getting these Anglo teachers to start teaching these kids in English so they have a life prospect. Those are the things that there are provisions for in the race to the top. So, we should vote for this and not just get hung up on these other little things.
Senator Petillo?
First, a couple process points or questions. Chairman, you mentioned let's get committee questions out there now, then we'll hear from the public, and then we'll come back just to wrap it up. Right. I would hope there's another opportunity to ask further questions, maybe get answers to some questions after public testimony, because as Senator Simitian pointed out, we're all trying to plow through the bill now, and especially with lack of a committee analysis, it's a little challenging. So I think the conversation is going to evolve, and the public testimony piece may provide us some time that we need to digest this. So I saw heads nodding in affirmation. I appreciate that. I'll comment on my abstention the last time we were here talking about this. I acted mainly because we all knew what was going to happen. We were going to vote something out of the committee, out of the Senate. It was going to go to the Assembly, and then it was going to change drastically. And so I was hesitant to cast a vote on something that I knew was not the final product. So here we are, flash forward. It's been about 6 weeks, and there seems to be a near final product in front of us, which I think is a good thing. With very little time to review it and no committee analysis, that causes me concern. Yes, we are at a critical juncture of public education in the state of California. I've heard you loudly and clearly, Senator Romero.
Emphasis on clearly more than loudly, perhaps?
Both, co-equal. Mr. Simitian got it.
I got it.
But let me begin to respond by saying details matter. So I think all the questions that are being raised today are important. I'll raise a couple now, and then again save some comments and additional questions for after public testimony. The first, and these are, believe it or not, the softballs of my list. On the parent empowerment petitions, we have a limit of 75 now. We've done away with the 2-year limit. Is there any sort of report back mechanism called for in the bill?
There's an interim evaluation and a final evaluation to look at the impact on education as well as the participation of parents.
And in what time period is that?
It's actually encompassed in the overall evaluation on Race to the Top, which this would be a component of, and so it's. Page 7. 7. So there's an interim evaluation report in June 1st, 2012, and a final report June 1st, 2014.
Okay. Now, the point of the parent trigger is really, tell me if I'm wrong or oversimplifying here, but to force the hand of a local school district to do something about these low-performing schools. Is that a good way to summarize it? And we're not necessarily prescribing what the list of options are for school board or district or local superintendent action for those schools, correct?
There is a list that's prescribed, but then there's one option that's more flexible that allows the parents and the districts to do something broader than just those 4 items that are required under federal Race to the Top.
Okay. So is there or is there not anything in current law that prohibits or prevents a local school board, a local superintendent from doing things along the lines of the list contained within this bill for schools that we're talking about here, the lowest decile schools?
There's, I wouldn't say there's a prohibition, but it's not likely that the school board will take an action to shut its own district down.
And that's just based on historical practice.
What we've seen in terms of that when NCLB first came into place, there were several things that could be selected from in terms of turning schools around. The only thing that really has been changed is curriculum. That was basically the answer to helping turn around schools, is to change the curriculum at these low-performing schools. There was a more severe action in Coachella, which actually put an administrator in, but that's very recent. But we haven't seen the types of changes that, in fact, say 7 years is too long. We have to do something now, or we're going to lose another generation of students.
No, I agree. I'm trying to find the distinction between, whether it's curriculum or other policy revolutionary change brought about by this bill versus are we just trying to get at an issue of political will at the local level? Because if there's nothing in current law that prohibits or prevents drastic action being taken like is being suggested in the bill, then is it really radical change in education policy in the state of California, or are we trying to find all ways to force the hand of local districts to do something for these schools that we know need help?
I think it's the latter. It's the acknowledgement that there are many districts that, for whatever reason, have failed to take action and continue to have. So
we're trying to legislate political will.
We are trying to adhere to the Race to the Top guidelines.
In the not the bill itself, but in the highlights sheet that was distributed, we're talking about intervening in persistently low-performing schools identified by the bottom 5% of all schools in federal program improvement, plus all high schools with graduation rates below 60% in each of the past 3 years. I know I stepped out of the room for a couple of minutes, but was there any discussion on the methodology at arriving that 60%? Just because I know that's been a point of contention in all the conversations about graduation versus dropout rates.
The guidelines specifically call out those criteria. It does permit states to select the time frame, 5 years, 3 years, 2 years. I think the idea of selecting 3 years worth of data was to focus on those that have persistently had graduation rates that were, far lower than the 60%. We can frankly pick whatever we want. The working product that came back said
we're not clarifying that debate for anybody with this bill.
This bill makes it clear to the schools what the criteria that the state will be using, so that the board or someone else can't come back and say, oh, no, we're going to use this other methodology. It makes clear this is how we're going to select you. We're going to look at the last 3 years, and if your graduation rates are lower than 60% in each of those years, you will be selected.
Based on a state methodology.
methodology.
Okay,
Yes.
let me bounce around just for a minute here before we get to public testimony. Also calls for the superintendent of public instruction to recommend ways to emphasize STEM, career and college readiness, etc. Again, is there anything in current law that prohibits or prevents the superintendent of public instruction from making such recommendations?
There's nothing that prohibits it. What this bill intends to do is position.
Has our current superintendent of public instruction not given these types of recommendations in the last 7-8 years of his service?
They have. I think this bill goes a little farther and looks at also credentialing, so we can try and enhance the STEM type courses and the quality of teaching in those courses. This is trying to position California not only to get the points, the maximum points possible, but to make us more competitive. And we all believe that these are the things that are called for in the state's application, and we want to make sure that there's no question that we have authority to follow those.
No, and the way you just phrased it, make sure there's no question that we have the authority. And I think that's my point.
Yes.
We do have the authority. We've had the authority to take a lot of these actions. So are we trying to legislate political will? That's what it's sounding like to me.
There's a requirement that the Attorney General has to look through our laws and make a determination whether or not our state law prohibits us from doing things, and we don't know what way he will rule. And so that we can make it clear that there's nothing in law that
I think the Attorney General would be hard-pressed to make a finding that current law prohibits or prevents the Superintendent of Public Instruction from making recommendations on these areas.
Sure.
Senator Padilla, let me indicate that in Senate Bill 1, the Superintendent of Public Instruction voiced support for Senate Bill 1. And these provisions here are consistent with Senate Bill 1. There was support from the Superintendent of Public Instruction, the Secretary. They agreed. I think part of it, and I hear what you're asking, and part of it is honestly, I agree. To a large extent, if you think about it, Race to the Top is here because, quite frankly, we haven't done anything. I mean, to some extent, that's why we're here. I'll go back to what President Obama said. I keep going back to the speech because to me it just tells the story. He said, we have to take drastic steps when our schools are failing. And when you listen to the rest of the text, he goes into, because we haven't moved. To some extent, I would say it's almost even embarrassing to say we're running a bill to say, you got to do it. Do something. That's really the essence. I think it speaks to the reality that we, whether it's the nation and here in California, we have an option. We don't do it. 90% of the choices are often it's in that little, the other category. It's saying, okay, pick one, but do it. And so, on your question, yeah, there's authority, but I would point out as well on the specific question you raised, the Superintendent of Public Instruction with his representative sat at the table when we heard SB 1 and said support. Not if amended, didn't raise the question, it's support. And so this is one where, and the superintendent, has been involved with discussions with the administration and others, full support on SB 1. Again, to the lateness of the day, we don't know on SB 4, but that part is consistent with what was passed in Senate Bill 1. And on the STEM issue, let me just say, this is where we heard quite a bit from chambers of commerce. This is where a lot of the chambers of commerce engaged and said, the world is flat. We're losing the race. You're an MIT graduate. We're losing the race when it comes to mathematics and science and technology. We could cite the proficiency levels on how low. Statewide in California, only 30% of our students are proficient in mathematics. It's lower for Latino students. It's lower for African American students. Recognizing we want to highlight STEM, critical for career technology education. This is an area, it's one of those where I think it's an easy piece, but it's one where, remember, on the bill, we're getting the bill ready, but to move it into an application. They're two different things, but we're authorizing and saying this is the intent, this is what we want to work. In the plan, it's fleshed out.
Mr. Chairman, In addition, there is a new STEM component that's not in current law, and that's where it cannot be done without this. It makes the application much more competitive, and it mandates the Commission on Teacher Credentialing to look at other routes to get
I
some
appreciate that
credentials.
component, and if anything, I wish the UC Board of Regents were listening as they're considering disproportionately raising the tuition for engineering students in our UC system, but that's a conversation for another day. Let me just end for now on this point. I want to reiterate the concerns by Senator Simitian on the criteria or terms that receiving districts can utilize to be determined by them on whether or not or when and how to accept students. The fact that it's vague at this point does trouble me because we have a history of showing in different parts of the state over time inequities and inequalities. So I know that'll be a topic of further conversation after we hear from the public.
Any other questions or comments from members?
Just get some clarification. When you talk about 5%, the bottom 5%, how many schools are we talking about in California, or how many school districts are we talking about?
The number of schools is somewhere between 140 and 200. It's going to depend on. It asks you to look at test scores, and it just depends on how you run that, whether you use API, and I think the bill calls for API, so maybe 140 school sites. In terms of districts, I'd have to go back. I didn't count the number of districts.
Okay, and then an open enrollment, you say you want open enrollment to be available for all kids in the bottom 10% of schools statewide, and that's API 1.
Mm-hmm.
How many...
That's about 900 school sites. It's about 10% of our
school sites.
Schools.
Okay, and then the parent empowerment piece is up to 75 schools within the lowest advanced stages of program improvement. These schools are they the same schools?
They're within that number. So when you're talking about those schools, it's all within the same number. The 5% is within the likely the first 10%,
okay.
And so are the 75. So if you're not one of those 5, then the parents should have the option to move their children to other schools.
Okay. Thanks for clarifying.
Anything else from the members? Okay.
Mr. Chair and members, thank you. And I must tell you that this has been an enlightening hearing for me. And Senator Romero, for you, I think that you've done a good job in what you've done. What I'm hearing here from Senator Simitian is that I think he understands where you're going. The question is it going to work the way it's written? And I'm here to tell you that I'm going to support your bill. I think that we always talk about work in progress, and I think it's something that we need to continue to move forward. On this notion of open enrollment, it is a small piece of what we're trying to do, but I've also heard a comment that maybe Latinos lack the sophistication to do this. Not from you. I happen to disagree with that fact. I think Latinos, parents, as you talked earlier, Senator, this is their issue. It is the great equalizer for them, is education. They want an opportunity, and they want to know more about it. And if we can put it in place, it is an option, and it's a great option to move their kids to get a better education. It's the only way out of the barrio that you talked about, the gang neighborhood. So as you go forward, I just hope that you take into consideration what Senator Simitian has stated, that we can't call a chair a table, and then it's a table. I think he made some very, very valid points on not having on the financial side and so forth. So I hope that as you move forward, and this might be the end of the bill, but that you really take into consideration of those comments, because at the end of the day, we want something that we're proud of. I mean, we're applying for money. It has to be done right, and we need it. So I hope you just take that into consideration.
Okay, thank you, Senator Maldonado. Senator Weiland,
I know. This,
all right, keep it brief because we do have more to move on.
Just a clarification, because I'm the one who said I unfortunately didn't think a lot of parents would take advantage of it. I hope Senator Maldonado was right. That would be wonderful, because that's ultimately what's going to drive. It's going to be parents who are going to drive all the reforms we need. So I love that if that's the case, and I think that's a good thing. And the other thing is, in some of these other issues, this can be amended on the Assembly side. I mean, we take care of money later all the time. The importance of this, I don't understand how we can live and not do something dramatic about this. So that's why I support the bill.
Thank you. Witnesses in favor?
Mr. Chairman, Bill Lucia with Ed Voice. I wanted to point out a couple things that are still noteworthy. In addition to the comments that I'll have about open enrollment, I wanted to point out that indeed, this doesn't have any issues regarding charters. We are gratified that the weakening of charter accountability is no longer part of what we had seen happening in the Assembly. We do believe there's some technical issues that need to be resolved in the interpretation on the growth model and the standards process, but you've seen our letters on other components, and with respect to the standards process, we think that a open process of a commission with public hearings is indeed appropriate. So we think that this is a definite improvement over earlier versions of this legislation that's gone through both houses. We want to highlight and strongly support the issue of the STEM and the career technical educator components. Those do not exist in current law at all. And this would be an opportunity for the first time in the history of California to have people seriously look at having faster routes to getting smart people in the classroom, and whether those are young people coming through not a 5-year program but a 4-year program like is done with some pilot programs with UTeach and a couple of our UC campuses, but expanding that more broadly, also having career changers come into the schools and be in there and help those kids. On open enrollment, you're going to hear some criticisms further, but I think in public testimony, I want to point out a few things. One, there's a myth that says that the open enrollment doesn't get you any points and race to the top. And I would say I absolutely categorically disagree with that. There are at least 60 points that open enrollment ties to in the competition. 25 of those are increased student outcomes. By definition, if a kid is currently enrolled in a failing school that's persistently failing for 8, 9, 10, 12 years, and they're going to a better school, you're going to have increased student outcomes. And that is directly tied to 25 points in the application. Also, 35 points in the application are tied to the notion of turning around failing schools. And we believe that a key ingredient, not a sufficient one, but a necessary ingredient in turning around low-performing schools is having the lever of parents truly having the choice to say, okay, I'm willing to give it a try, and I'm going to stick it out. But if it's just not changing, I get to pull my kids out. And again, that's tied directly to 35 points. Another red herring issue you'll hear is about transportation. Federal law under Title I provides not only the opportunity for transportation if the legislature acts to do this. That's another, Senator Padilla, another component that does not exist now, but this bill would provide a mechanism to connect the dots and draw the lines so that students that were in schools that were in corrective action that exercise the open enrollment option would have transportation paid for under Title I. And the priority for the transportation goes to the poorest and the ones that are most likely to fail first. And so you will hear from people that suggest that, oh, well, what about the transportation? Well, guess what? You have to act on this in order to make a provision for transportation that federal law already provides for. And I think I'll leave it with that. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next witness.
Catherine Gaither, Governor's Office of Education. We just saw the language this morning. We do not have an official position. I would like to note that much of the bill is very similar to the governor's proposal, but there are several significant differences. One is that there is no removal of the charter cap, as I think the senator indicated. Another is that while the parent trigger is here, there is a cap now on how many schools can participate. The third difference is open enrollment has been changed from a larger pool to a smaller pool of participants. There's a few clarifying and technical amendments that we will work with the author's office on. Thank you.
Thank you. Next witness.
Margaret Fortune. I'm a trustee of the California State University, and I'm president of the Fortune School of Education and an advocate for the education of black children. I want to thank the senator for her bill and also thank my senator, Senator Steinberg, who I'm proud to call my senator today, for helping to move this issue along. I want to thank you for the movement on the parent trigger. And I want to thank you for the compromise on charter schools. I do, however, want to comment on this issue of open enrollment because there's an interesting coalition being formed. The rub here is what happens to the schools that kids leave because those institutions aren't doing a good job, and what happens to the institutions that they go to because they are doing a good job. Senator Simitian makes a lot of technical arguments. Most of them, in my view, Senator, seem to be geared towards how a district that has the goods, the ability to provide kids with a better education, can say no. I imagine in your district there are districts that are very good at what they do. Palo Alto High School, I think, is in your district, as may be some schools in East Palo Alto. I think that there's an interesting rub that the administrators of the districts who are doing well will have when the kids from East Palo Alto come over and knock on the door and say, I want in. I can also imagine that there probably would be lawsuits if those kids from East Palo Alto walked over and said, I want into Pali, and the answer was no. And there wasn't a good reason that that district could substantiate to tell those kids no. I imagine those kids' parents would say, you know, it feels like my civil rights are being violated. And I imagine that people like me would stand up and say, you know what? Something don't smell right in the state of Denmark, and you're probably right. This is a historic opportunity, senators, for both those who have the opportunity to create change for more than the kids in their neighborhood, and for those that have districts in their neighborhood that frankly aren't doing a good job, and for whom we cannot make the excuse that the institution needs to continue to exist just because it does now. Some of those districts need to close because they may be good at a lot of things, but it ain't educating kids. So we can't be in a situation here where we create an alliance of those that are lousy at what they do and those who are good at what they do to shut out the very kids that we all need to serve in order for us to exist as a society in California. Because the consequence of shutting out those kids, whether it's because now there are not jobs in the inner city school district that serve them poorly now, or because now there's harder work to do when kids dressed like gang members come and knock on the doors of Palo Alto High School. The consequence is that the criminal justice system is serving those kids, and we're creating a condition, we've already created it, a condition of lawlessness in our society. The public schools ought to be doing this work. And so this open enrollment provision has everything to do with the civil rights of these kids and the next chapter on Brown versus Board of Education. The next chapter on Martin Luther King, you turn the page and there's Barack Obama. This is the decision point. And I want to tell you, being candid, as someone who has served 2 California governors, a Republican and a Democrat, and a lifelong Democrat, we as Democrats can be liberal, but right now we need to be progressive. And that calls for shaking some of these alliances that we have. And when our school superintendents in our district call us and tell us to make technical arguments about finance, to say, you know what? We're out of line on this. We're out of step. We have to have a vision for the future. It's what the democratic society is based on, and it's the reason why democratic societies have education and a free press. So that we can have a citizenry that has a social fabric. That's what your decision is about today. And the last thing I'll say is when officials fail their people, they cause citizens to be driven to the streets in unrest. This is a small hearing room, packed to the gills. But there are a lot more people watching. So I urge your aye vote.
Thank you very much.
Through the chair, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, when somebody calls out specific misinformation, I'd like the opportunity to just share. Ms. Fortune doesn't have to imagine. If she checked her facts, she'd know that the Palo Alto Unified School District, including Palo Alto High School, which you referenced by specific example, has a voluntary transfer program with the community of East Palo Alto and the Ravenswood Elementary School District, which has been in place for more than 20 years. And one of the concerns that some of my constituents have is that if inartfully crafted, this measure has the ability to threaten that voluntary transfer program. But it is patently inaccurate to suggest that that knock on the door has not already come and been responded to some decades ago.
Thank you for that clarification.
May I address the senator since he addressed my comment?
If we want to have this colloquy outside the room, then I think that's fine, Ms. Fortune. I'm happy to make time.
I'm just going to have it inside the room. Let's not allow the example to obscure the point.
Let's not allow the misinformation conveyed by your imaginings
let's not
to
have the back
push
and forth.
aside
I think your
the
colloquy
facts.
outside is appropriate here. Let's move on to the next supporters. And I would ask that the rest of you please keep your comments brief. We've had two speak longer, and we'll allow the opposition to have two longer ones, and then it'll be shorter, but keep it brief and move on. Thank you.
Mr. Chair and members, Rand Martin on behalf of the California Charter Schools Association. I'll simply say that we do support strong accountability standards for charter schools. We believe that the process that's outlined in SB 4, as the process was in SB 1, does do that and does have real consequences for charter schools that are not performing well, but supports those that are doing a good job, and we ask you to support this bill. Thank you.
Thank you. Next.
Andrew Governor, Governmental Advocates, on behalf of Parent Revolution and Green Dot Charter Schools. I'd like to yield my time to Shirley Ford, is with Parent Revolution, and Ben Austin is with Parent Revolution. We're here specifically on the parent trigger, not any other issue in the bill. We support and agree with the compromise that the Senate, the Assembly, and we believe the administration have put together. While we would not like to see a cap of 75, because we believe parents should have this power to make those decisions, we do support at this moment that cap because we believe the data will show on the back end that this was the right decision to do in the long run, and it really gives parents the opportunity. With that, Shirley Ford.
By the way, you have no time to yield because we're a little beyond brief comments. Thank you. Next speaker.
I'll be really brief then. My name is Shirley Ford, and I'm with the Parent Revolution. I am a parent and a grandparent, and I just want to say thank Senator Romero, and I'd like to thank Assembly Speaker Karen Bass as well for listening on yesterday. I'm down on the ground with parents, and I think that if given an opportunity, that we will be able to succeed. We've just never been given an opportunity, and I think that the parent trigger will actually give parents an opportunity to come up and unite together and go to the school board and have an option to actually put some teeth in No Child Left Behind. And I just want to say this on the open enrollment. Parents will get on a bus to take their kids to school. So the myth that they may not get there or whatever, I think that's false. But the parent trigger is definitely a way to go. And I've been involved with a campaign in Venice where there are upper middle class parents that made themselves leaders and actually went into the school and talked to other parents. And we have this saying, each one, teach one. So I support the bill, and I encourage you to please give us an aye vote. Help us to help ourselves, please.
Appreciate it. Thank you. Next speaker.
Thank you. My name is Ben Austin with Parent Revolution. I want to thank all of you. I want to thank Senator Romero, Senator Steinberg, leaders in the Assembly, and leaders in this body right here for recognizing the moment that we are in and recognizing that we have an opportunity to transform public education for the children of California. The parent trigger specifically not only makes California stand out in the race to the top competition, potentially brings hundreds of millions of dollars to the state of California when our schools and our parents and our kids desperately need them. It not only puts California back on the map as an educational leader and an education innovator, but it represents an entirely new paradigm for how we think about education, how we think about reforming our education system. It's not about anything other than simply giving parents power and trusting them to do right by their own kids. It's about recognizing that parents, above and beyond all the other stakeholders who are very important and critical to this process, but parents are in the best position to make decisions about what's good for our kids and for our future. Now, Senator Padilla.
Please wrap it up.
I want to answer an issue that Senator Padilla raised, which I think is really important. And Senator Padilla, by the way, has been a leader in this body, but I've known him as a leader, as the president of the LA City Council. He's cared about his poor district for a long time and worked hard on these issues. He asked a really profound question. He said, "Don't we already have the power to do this?" And for the most part, the answer is yes. And that's the scary thing, that we've got 1,000 schools that are systemically failing in California, and we've got the power to change them, and we haven't done it. The way we're going to do it is to give parents power to do it themselves, and I ask you to seize this moment and stand with the parents and children of California. Thank you.
Next witness, remind you to be brief, please.
Mr. Chair, members of the committee, Virginia Strawn Martin on behalf of Los Angeles Unified School District. Our board took a very, very early position in support of Senator Romero's SB 1. This bill, in looking at the language, is very, very similar with just a few exceptions, and I'm sure the board would concur that we strongly support it.
Thank you. Next witness.
Mr. Chairman. Excuse me. Go ahead. Steve Culver on behalf of the Board of Supervisors for Los Angeles County. The board hasn't taken an official position on these recent amendments yet. However, the board has adopted a motion in support of Race to the Top. They believe that the program can provide a great amount of improvement for the students of the county, and especially the students in our court schools. The board did take a support position of the Senator's SB 1, and we appreciate the Senator's efforts to move the process along. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Next witness.
Mr. Chairman and members, Malachi Sekou Amen with the California State NAACP, and I'm not going to stay here for long. Just want to thank Senator Romero for her courageous and just awesome work. Also, Senator Steinberg for his leadership on this issue. And we're here today to support this bill because we believe that we don't have an option to do nothing. We have black kids, Latino kids dying. And right now we have I would correct the previous speaker, not just 1,000 low-performing schools, but thousands, 3,000 at least, low-performing schools in California. We have half of African American and Latino students dropping out of high school, and this is simply not acceptable. We think that this bill takes the right approach, and we would urge you to move this bill forward. And we can we do agree, the devil is in the details, Senator Simitian, but we would like to make sure that this bill moves forward so that we don't end up $700 million in a hole and then have to end up trying to fix it in June of next year. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Next witness.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair and members. Chris Reef on behalf of State Superintendent of Public Instruction Jack O'Connell. The superintendent did have a support position on SB X51. He also had a supportive amended position on the Brownlee Bill AB X58. But we unfortunately have not had an opportunity to review the amendments of SB X54 in full. However, the superintendent would say that at a minimum we would like to see a mutually agreeable measure come out of the legislature that addresses our eligibility for applying for Race to the Top. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Any other witnesses in favor? Witnesses opposed, please come forward. And as with the others, we'll have a couple of you, hopefully you've self-selected and can speak a little lengthier, and then we'll have brief comments from the rest.
Good afternoon. Martha Zaragoza-Diaz, representing the Californians Together Coalition. We do not have a formal opposition yet because we just received these amendments, but we do have very serious concerns with what we've read here. First, I'd like to state just the purposes of RTTT. Two purposes is to close the achievement gap and to improve student performance. I want you to remember that, to keep that in mind. I've read this bill. Our members have read this bill as well as the other extraordinary session bills. And while open enrollment and charter schools may assist in closing the achievement gap or narrowing the achievement gap and improving student performance, those aren't the only tools. We are missing the most important tool in these bills, and that is focusing on instructional strategies, academic strategies to those student subgroups that are failing to meet state and federal accountability targets. There is no language in this bill, either required in the state plan or in the component specific to the persistently low achievement schools, that require that these options or that the state plan target resources and focus academic interventions, instructional strategies specific to those student subgroups that are not meeting those targets. Our sophisticated data systems are going to show us when we're here next year that there probably is little improvement because those subgroups are not being addressed. I attended the State Board of Education meeting on Thursday. The state plan didn't call for a focus on these student subgroups, and I have the MOU here, the preliminary MOU. In the voluntary element, it says, voluntary, now this is voluntary element, engage in a concerted effort to improve instruction for English learners. What's wrong with where's the students with disabilities? Where's our African American students? Where are our poor students? They should not be voluntary elements. They should be required in the state plan and in that component regarding persistently low achieving schools. Without that happening, we're not going to see a change with regards to closing the achievement gap. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next witness.
Liz Guillen with Public Advocates. I want to associate myself with the passionate comments of my colleague, Marta Diaz for Californians Together. We have not been able to decide a position on this Senate Bill 4. We really appreciate, however, all the work that's been done by Senator Romero, Senate staff, and Assemblymember Brownlee and Assembly staff in trying to craft a compromise. I do want to speak to 2 points. On the open enrollment issue, it does seem to me that there are efforts to try to pare this down because there is a recognition that it's a new initiative. But if we want to make it work, and if we want to know if it works, the evaluation piece should be as strong as the districts of choice piece. It should be required. Districts should not be simply encouraged to keep an accounting, but they should be required in the same way that districts of choice are. And the evaluation and that information should be brought forward in the same way that the Ledger Analyst Office is required to bring that forward. People have made statements about good old-fashioned democracy working both in open enrollment and in parent engagement. Unfortunately, the good old-fashioned democracy has not really been easily accessed by immigrant families and poor families and families that do not speak English. And because of that, we have been very concerned about access to even the parent trigger benefits as well as the open enrollment. There should be ongoing support to build capacity of parents. And then finally, I would say that in terms of focusing Race to the Top on the things that it's really about, I haven't seen anything in here regarding the work that districts are supposed to do for equitably distributing not just effective teachers, but highly qualified and experienced teachers, as that language is used in ARA, the foundational legislation for Race to the Top. Even though we're moving toward highly effective, right now there are no proxies except qualifications and the things that we will be developing, so we can't just let that go. And to the extent there's going to be a push on that in the STEM piece, I think it should be part of that. And it should also elevate our commitment to ensuring that any alternative programs meet the needs of students with limited English proficiency and students with special needs. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next witness.
Patricia Rucker, California Teachers Association. I will endeavor not to repeat some of the things you've already heard. So I'll begin my comments by saying CTA does oppose this bill. One of the most important reasons why we oppose the bill includes the priorities or the recommendation for creating a new alternative certification. CTA believes that alternative certification is a very important element for building out the workforce and creating a pipeline that will sustain California's teaching workforce. This proposal fails to understand the architecture of California's pipeline. It does not need an alternative certification process that eliminates or lowers the standards for accreditation or calls upon the Commission to create an alternative certification process for participants that are not currently eligible to meet accreditation requirements that are already established. CTA is vehemently opposed to lowering accreditation standards for preparation programs for the sole purpose of creating alternative certification. Creating a STEMS credential is not an easy fix for addressing a voluntary element of the program. If you think that's an easy fix, you don't understand that people who are in the sciences, in engineering, and in mathematics and other fields are not coming into teaching for a couple of reasons, not including the fact that there is a GPO-WEP issue with the Social Security at their retirement that would mean they lose a lot of money as part of the Social Security offset if they choose teaching as a second career. The easy fix is to address that issue. The simple fix is to lower standards, and we are opposed to that. CTA is opposed to this bill because it again is a distraction from the debate about what should be going on, about doing what's right to improve student learning and to support public educators in public schools and to put California in the best place to apply for Race to the Top. CTA believes that the bill's unclear fiscal policies for open enrollment are not a distraction and a technical detail. It would create chaos in local school districts, undermine local control, and drain money from classrooms at a time when the state is far more than $700 million down. We're $17 billion down, and you know as well as I do there will be additional cuts. CTA opposes this bill because we continue to relegate teachers to being the blame and the primary responsibility for the reason why schools are failing. We continue to suggest that the reason why schools need to change is because there's a failure in the way we instruct students. Teachers need to be partners, not the blame, in any educational reform. This bill does not do that. It is the only way to improve student learning to make sure that all stakeholders have a voice, have a view, and are able to participate in the way in the process this bill has been introduced. And in the 15 minutes that CTA has had to review this bill, that is not a collaborative and inclusive process. California teachers and education support professionals work very hard in California public schools every day. Student achievement has improved over the last 7 years because of that work. Test scores have increased in every grade level over the past 5 years. CTA understands what student achievement looks like, and more importantly, what school reform looks like. And we will bet the $2.7 billion that we sued the governor to bring back to schools and place into CWEA as an effective reform proposal over any initiative to simply bring $700 million into California as a distraction, as a proposal that fails to address the real issues behind what it needs to close the achievement gap. Thank you.
Thank you. I'd like to ask the remaining witnesses to keep their comments brief, please.
Good morning. Barrett Snyder on behalf of a number of clients. On behalf of the Franklin McKinley School District in San Jose, the Pomona Unified School District, San Bernardino County Office of Education, we're opposed to the open enrollment provisions. And on behalf of the Santa Clara County Office of Education, we do not have an official position because we haven't had time to review the bill. We will say that we've had significant discussions around the issues Senator Simitian raised about the concerns around the appeals process for the interdistrict transfers. Open enrollment, interdistrict transfer to us appear to be two different things, and it's not clear how that process would work. Want to say something hasn't been mentioned yet, but around the funding for transportation for poor students. This is an issue we've testified to previously. The bill is silent on how to pay for the transportation. It's particularly significant for poor families. You can imagine the single mother working 2 jobs, doesn't own a car. Students go to school in South Sacramento. They want to go to a charter school in Natomas. It's no insignificant feat to move that student that far. It's going to cost money. It's not clear how you pay for that. Mr. Lucia testified that Title I funds are available for this. That we disagree. The Title I funding for school choice, which I believe is what he's referring to, is to move students within the district to other schools. If attending a low-performing school within the district, you use the Title I funds to move the student to the other school. It says you can use those funds to go to another district, but it requires that the districts enter into an agreement, which is inconsistent with the way this bill would be written and would be inconsistent with federal law. We don't think you could do that. So with that, we think that there is no funding for transportation. That's a significant policy concern. And in terms of equity, access to education, equal access to education, courts have interpreted the California Constitution.
Red flag's going up because you've been beyond brief. So
okay, I'll wrap up saying that the courts have interpreted the Constitution that you have a requirement to provide students with equal access to education. This could run you afoul of that, and we would encourage you to consider that as you consider the bill. Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker.
Patty Scripter, California State PTA. Our organizational policy is to read a bill before we take a position, so we don't have a position on the bill as of yet. However, we have supported the race to the top from the beginning because we believe it's an opportunity to focus the conversation on educational reform, which we've supported and advocated on behalf of for quite some time. Improving educational outcomes for all students and closing the achievement gap are among our highest priorities as an organization. And so we have some concerns that we'll have to look into based on the conversation by Senator Weiland and Senator Simitian regarding open enrollment. Concerns over Senator Weiland's remarks about parents not really being able to take advantage of this and that it's sort of an empty promise. And then also on the financial impact, does this mean that our English language learners and our special ed students who are more expensive to educate will be limited in their access to this if there's going to be a financial impact statement? So we would have grave concerns over that. And we also truly believe that we have to build a system where parent engagement is supported and integrated in everything we do in schools and not treated as a one-time event in times of crisis or an application. Thank you.
Thank you. Next.
Good afternoon. Sherry Griffith with the Association of California School Administrators. We, too, do not have a position on the bill. We just began reviewing it within the hour. We can see, though, reflected some dialogue, I think, between the Assembly and Senate. We'd like to urge the committee and urge the Senate and Assembly to consider what we used to do. I know we did it with the Public School Accountability Act, where we actually have a conference committee where some of these issues could be addressed, I think, fully. Without that, the context of this for our membership is at a critical stage. On Monday, 250 superintendents were on a conference call with the state superintendent and the governor's office discussing the January 8th deadline to sign what are binding MOUs. This is a written agreement to commit to the state plan, of which these superintendents and all of the other superintendents in California have not seen. They've seen an MOU. If they sign the MOU, and it's a binding agreement, any corresponding legislation that becomes a mandate will join that in our view. That means that once they sign, then they are committed to whatever the Senate and Assembly will be doing. We were told on Monday in the conference call there's just 2 factors that they need in legislation to move the plan forward by January 19th. That is, address the struggling schools piece and the legal construct for that, and to address a legal construct for the standards and assessment review. And we think that both of these bills have that opportunity. We would urge the committees to move forward and and the Senate and Assembly. Finally, this bill does not contain what we think is the absolute critical part to get districts to sign on to the plan they haven't seen, and that is finances. The plan does not indicate how much of these dollars will go to local districts if they do sign the binding agreement. And right now, only 50% is required to go to local districts. We think that number should be higher, and we recommend that for any of the measures that pass.
Thank you. Next witness.
Erica Hoffman on behalf of the California School Boards Association. Like every other organization, we do not have a formal position on this new piece of legislation. I would just like to say that many of the comments that have been said by ACSA, by CTA, by others are very reflective of the concerns we have had all along, both with a lot of the provisions that are in the race to the top in and of itself, but also in trying to get legislation. One thing I would mention that was talked about earlier, and while this piece of the bill is something that I do need to really take back to my folks for full discussion, is on the parent empowerment piece. But the issue that was raised earlier was the evaluation of it. Keep in mind, the evaluation is for those things under the Race to the Top program. The parent empowerment piece actually affects every other district that is determined to be low achieving, that are outside of that 5%. I really think it does need an evaluative component of itself if it does remain as part of this measure. So I will leave you with that, but I do want to appreciate the work that has been done by both Senator Romero, by the Assembly, by all of you in making sure that all these questions are raised, and I hope that we are able to come to some answers of them soon. Thank you.
Next witness.
Dolores Sanchez with the California Federation of Teachers. We stood in opposition to Senator Romero's previous legislation. A number of the issues that I would raise have already been raised, but one thing that I just wanted to mention is the issue of the removal of the charter cap. The reason that was placed in the first place was to make sure that you were able to replicate high quality schools, and with this, the removal of the cap doesn't speak to quality at all, and that's something that's it's going to be unacceptable to us. Along with, I echo many of the comments that have already been made.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Next witness.
Harold Boyd, representing United Teachers of Los Angeles. Just a couple of comments. Number one, I seem to be at the end all the time, and my big issue is that this is about money. That this is one-time money. And what happens now when that money disappears? The other issue that UTLA has been concerned about are the number of dropouts among our Latina and black kids. I don't think any of the bills that have been presented speak much to students that drop out. And by the way, I was sitting out in the audience, and I'm trying to make sure that I get it right, that school districts who send their students, or the student ends up in another school under open enrollment, that school district is protected in that they get to keep that ADA money. And I'm wondering, is this an incentive to not think about those dropout kids once they are out of that district? So we need to clarify that issue and make sure that that is not the case with ADA, because I think a lot of our kids are being lost via the dropout route. I cannot comment very much on the current bill that's before you because we have not had the time to really study that bill or to take a look at it. But we did have a supportive amendment on the Brownlee bill, which had to do with charter school accountability and the cap. And my understanding is that it's no longer part of this bill. But again, I appreciate the work that's been done. We still need to continue this work, whether we get funding from Race to the Top or not. This is an issue that has finally hit the front burner, and we need to really deal with those kids in those situations, period.
Thank you. Next witness.
Good afternoon. Roberta Ferger with PICO, California. We're a faith-based community organizing network representing 450,000 families throughout the state. We do not have a formal position on the bill. Like others, we need to review it before we do that. I do want to acknowledge and appreciate the work of both the Senate and the Assembly to try to reach some compromises. And I want to speak specifically to the parent piece. We welcome the attention to parents and the focus on parents and the critical role they play in specifically turning around our persistently low-performing schools. We think that's important, and we know from the research that it's critical if we want to sustain the reform. We think the trigger shakes things up. It clearly will shake things up in schools and in districts that have languished too long. That said, we do believe strongly that there are ways to strengthen it, and specifically to make it more meaningful for parents and to make it more, to build capacity in our communities, which is what we need, and to ensure that the reform is sustainable over time. So I'm going to make two specific recommendations to that regard. One is that at a minimum, and we do believe this is a minimum, that there be informational hearings where parents hear about what the options are for turning around a school and can begin to make some assessments of what is best for their school community before they sign a petition. Now, you can't mandate that folks go to meetings, but at a minimum, you can require those meetings be held on the school site. We do think that's a minimum. So people are making informed decisions about their school. A more powerful option still, we believe, is that the trigger, what the trigger triggers, if you will, what the petition triggers is a committee that has the power, that has the parent representation of at least 50%, to look at options, to study those options, and to make an informed recommendation that says, here's how we want to turn around our school. What that does is that builds capacity, that builds involvement, and it creates a transparent process that doesn't just result in another set of hearings, doesn't result in another committee, but results in meaningful turnaround that is sustainable over time. We've put forth these recommendations, and we would really welcome the opportunity to work with the author, either here or on the Assembly side, to talk about how those might be implemented. Again, thank you for your time and for the focus on this important issue.
Thank you. Any other witnesses against? Okay, then we'll close the public testimony portion of this and bring it back to the committee. You want to have, see a couple of you talking here, trying to get a sense of how we want to proceed here, whether you would like to respond, Senator Romero, and then we can open it up for one last round from the committee here, or whether you want to get the questions first and then respond in general as a close. Your call.
Maybe I'll just go ahead and respond on a couple of items.
Let me make one observation. You know, I'd like to recognize Senator Scott here. Usually he's not so quiet when he's in this room, at least in the past.
Senator Scott?
We appreciate you still having a fervor for education and being involved in the process, even if on the other side of the dais. So thank you. Good to recognize you. Go ahead, Senator Murray.
Okay. Just on the last comment from advocating for PICO, and PICO does fantastic work. Page 9 of the bill actually does incorporate the hearing. So we'd go ahead and say take a look at that provision. We did feel that was very important. There's a lot of issues here before us today. You know, is capacity financial? Is financial capacity? Those are issues, etc. Some of them are, I believe, there are technical. Others, I believe, we can work it out. I absolutely believe that. The concern was, are there financial concerns? We indicated we can write language. Let me go back to the process, though, and people spoke on both sides of the issue. A lot of lament is we're here at the last minute. Yes, we are. It's our doing. It is our doing. The President of the United States announced the call for Race to the Top, I believe it was on August 20th. It was summertime. We weren't wearing coats and sweaters. We were wearing sleeveless, and we were hot. It was in August. We, on a bipartisan basis in the Senate, introduced a bill, Senate Bill 1, in special session, when the governor stood up and responded to the call from the president. That was, I believe, on August 20th. It was the last week of August, introduced a bill. We did hearings. We went up and down the state, and we did hearings. The bill was in print. We discussed. We heard a lot of opposition, make no doubt about it. We heard a lot of support as well. flash forward because this is the year that has never ended, and it's not over yet, as we know. August came. September came. There was still discussion. We were embroiled in water. We were embroiled in budget. We were embroiled with a lot of things. We in this legislature waited. We waited. We adjourned. We came back. Special session was still there. The Senate on November 5th voted out Senate Bill 1, November 5th. I don't know what day it is. Is it the 16th, the 17th? I know it's December. Thank you. The 17th. It's December 17th. A few days ago, moving the bill, we went to the Assembly. We heard Senate Bill 1. It was killed. AB 8 was passed out. Discussions back, good discussions, honest discussion, difficult discussions, loud discussions, and concise discussions. Make no doubt about it. When you're dealing with a civil rights issue, sometimes the volume gets turned up. Senator Steinberg has been heroic in the effort. But we are here. And we also know, too, that the clock's ticking. MOU has to be signed. The nation's not waiting. Some people believe it's about money. $700 million to me is a lot of money. And my districts would like it. Your district, I believe, would like it and need it more than like it. But I've argued as well, it's not just about money. It's a template for reform. It's a recognition, as the president himself has said, we have to do and to take drastic steps when our schools are failing. There's a reason there's been a focus on the toughest assignment, the turnaround schools. So we come back today. Discussions back and forth. Ledge Council, I know, has been working all night. We were prepared with AB 8 analysis. We had the analysis there. We waited back and forth. I mean, there have been conversations in and out till after midnight and early morning. The call came this morning. The author is pulling the bill. We are at this point with, and yet, as we started preparing for this, we prepared Senate Bill 4, because I will argue that failure cannot be an option. It's us. And we have delayed. We have waited. The clock has ticked. August is when this began. It's mid-December with days away for us to say, are we going to submit an application to Race to the Top? I believe we can. I believe we should. I believe we must. Senator Simitian, meet me in the hallway. Let's work on this language. And yes, you're right. It is my responsibility to figure out language. But it's also, I would ask too, because this bill has my name on it, and make no doubt about it, when the Senate bill was killed in the Assembly, I told Senator Steinberg, I don't need a bill. I don't have to have my name on a bill. It's not about a name on a bill. I want a vehicle that addresses eligibility and competitiveness. That's what I want. And I think it's our obligation in this room to deliver. Can we get to 5 votes? Not all of us are here. That's life. That's the luck of the draw. In another configuration, yes, we could. Today, it depends on maybe a courtesy vote. Maybe saying, keep hope alive, let's move it forward. We've heard work in progress again. But the options are simple. We can talk about everything we want. I know, too, people are saying they want to catch planes. I mean, let's be honest with each other. Let's be honest. We have waited, and the nation is not waiting for us. We do it today, and if it fails, I will ask reconsideration. But I would ask, even with the doubts that you may express, This is the only game in town right now. It's the only thing we have left on the table. And you tell me which one of us are going to stand up and announce to the nation, we couldn't get it done. I hope we don't. I hope we don't. I hope we say, Gloria, I don't like this, and this, but I like this, and this. Because what we see today, it has been, and you might look at it and think, what's this, what's that, I haven't read it. We have debated these issues left and right for months, and no, we don't have the analysis. And Jim Wilson, who's retiring, we should thank him. I think to some extent, too, we worked him as it was to get the amendments for AB 8, because we are racing with the clock. I believe in process, but sometimes the clock is stronger than the process. And Education Committee, they produced an analysis. I sent it back. They came back. We had, I think, 3 different versions. They have been working. Talk to Ledge Council. If they're still awake now, they probably are, because they're on the clock. They know the clock is ticking. Our staff members, the Pro Tem's office, my office. I know Chris I blended you and your staff has been here. The Assembly, the Speaker, Mr. Simpson. I know everybody has been working long hours, and, if we're a little bit loud this morning, we're human, we're tired too. So I am going to ask you, it's what we have. It goes back again to the Assembly. I am asking for 5 votes. 5 votes today, and I'm one of them, as you know. And Senator Maldonado, you said you'll support, even with the hesitations you have. And I accept that. That's 2 votes. Senator Huff, I think you're a 3rd vote. Senator Weiland, I hope you're a 4th vote. I need 1 more vote. And not me. This isn't about me. Race to the Top in California needs 1 more vote to simply say, move it to appropriations, move it to the floor. I'm not the pro tem, but if we all want to stay here through tomorrow and Friday and Saturday and Sunday, fine with me, because quite frankly, I've been here anyway. But I think, too, it's partly trusting us that, look, we're not going to get a bill if we don't get a majority vote in both houses. We're not. I am asking you to say, trust us to go back, those of us who will say we'll stay tonight and tomorrow and whatever time it takes to just work it out. Trust us. 1 vote. Doesn't obligate you to vote on the floor. Doesn't obligate you to vote, I hope, if it could come back from concurrence. Give the kids of California 1 vote today to be able to say, when we head out to the airport, Race to the Top is dead. I know I've spoke loudly today. I also hope I've spoke clearly. And I would just respectfully ask, with all the questions that linger and the lack of paper, because, it's the clock. This started in August. It's December 17th. We are days away from saying California's in the race or pack up and go home. That is literally the question before we adjourn the committee today. And I implore you, with whatever reservations you have, to say, let us not, when we go to the airport, whenever we go, let whoever wants to stay to continue working this out. And I'm the eternal optimist. I believe we can. I respectfully ask for an aye vote to let us continue to figure out a vehicle. We are close. We are so, I know it sounds like old news, but for anybody who's been in these negotiations left and right and up and down, and people have yelled at each other and people have hugged each other, I really believe we can. It's giving and it's taking. I kind of laughed and said, maybe it's the race to the compromise, and somebody said, don't say that. But you know what, though? It's a democracy. It's imperfect. We're working to make sure we can get a majority vote. It's not everything I want. I've given a lot. It's not everything other people want. They've given a lot, and I respect that. It's not everything you want. And I think you have a right to say, we want more. But give us the vote to allow us to go back and see, can we do it? And I would say we'll know tonight, tomorrow, probably. Can we do it? And if we can't, then we'll say, you know what? We gave it our best effort. Go home. But I think if we work at it, we can say we gave it our best effort. We met on common ground, and the beneficiaries are the kids of California. Lowering my voice, I will respectfully ask for an aye vote.
Thank you. Senator Simitian, you had another bite of the apple you wanted?
Oh, I've got a couple I want, actually.
Okay, well,
thank you.
It's a big apple.
Thank you. Some questions, and then I want to defer to others before I get to a second set of questions. Senator Romero, you're the author of the bill that's now before us. Do you commit that you will be taking amendments in the Assembly so that we will have an opportunity to see this bill in its final form in this House?
Yes.
Okay. Do you commit?
And let me just say, that's provided that it could move out of committee and off the Senate floor to get over to the Assembly.
I understand. But
I'm not taking anything for granted.
You've asked us to put the votes in place, and so one of the questions I have, a series of questions I have to ask is, am I going to get a chance to weigh in, both as a member of the Senate, but also as a member of this committee, on the final product? Because this is the second time we're in the, trust me, it's a work in progress, and that's fine. I want to be very clear. I'm not criticizing the process. I'm just saying the process presents some challenges. So there's no explicit or implicit criticism. If I felt otherwise, I'd share that directly. I don't. We're in a challenging circumstance. I'm trying to figure out, as you are, how to make that work and for all of us to do our jobs well. So then the second question is, do you as the author commit to bring the bill back here to the committee for a committee vote before it goes to the floor once it comes out of the Assembly? And the reason for that, and let me just lay the politics out for everybody, it's pretty clear. I don't want to enable this bill to move forward, end up with something that I couldn't and wouldn't have supported, and then discover that there were 21 votes on the floor of the Senate for a bill that I couldn't and would have supported, but that got out of here because I cast an aye vote.
Okay, Senator, let me respond this way. I am not the pro tem of the California State Senate. I think, with all due respect, that's a question to be raised with the pro tem. I would look to you and say, if we want to do that, I'm here. I've been here. Well, but the only thing is that I'm going to put the question back to each one of you. Are you willing to cancel your flights? Are you willing to stay here? Because if that's the case, I'll go tell the pro tem, Mr. Pro Tem, give us another shot. But that does mean then each one of you,
Senator,
we're not getting out of here, and that's fine with me.
If the bill gets out of this committee, gets off the Senate floor, it goes to the Assembly. If the Assembly then amends your bill, it has to come back to us anyway on concurrence. My point is, I'd like the opportunity to cast a vote in this committee, and I'd like this committee to have the opportunity to hear the bill in final form with a little more time in advance. And I think that clearing this committee after we have a real bill that is the final product that we all have time to look at ought to be the precondition to it going back to the Senate floor. Now, I understand you're not the pro tem. You are, however, the author of the bill. Coincidentally, you're also the chair of the committee. I'm guessing that if you'll make that commitment, I can't speak for the pro tem, obviously, but I'm guessing that if you'd make the commitment as both the chair and the author, that you're willing to have the bill heard back here. That would go a long way, I think, towards assuaging concerns about letting a bill out in unfinished form when you've essentially made a plea a second time, let me work on a bill in progress. And that's the question I'm asking is, are you, as the chair and the author, willing to make that commitment?
Yes, I am.
Thank you. I appreciate that very much. Then let me ask just some questions, and in this case, I'm not looking for details. I'm trying to get a sense, because you encouraged me, I think, or all of us, to sort of try and get a sense of what we're trying to accomplish here. So without so much worrying the details, on the issue of transportation, which came up quite a bit, let me say, first of all, I actually don't buy the argument that if you can't get every single kid transportation to move from one place to another, that somehow that's a fatal flaw. It's not ideal, but better we help some than none. I would, however, like to know what your understanding is of how your transportation provisions in the bill actually would allow a group of kids to get from where they are and don't want to be to the place they would like to be, just so I can understand how real that opportunity to get from point A to point B is.
Without getting into too many details, under current federal law, any school that's in program improvement, whether it be 1 through 5, has an obligation to use up to 20% of its money for transportation initially within the district, and then once the school is in PI 5, federal law obligates those same districts to provide for transportation outside of the district or within wherever the parents choose. But there's a current federal obligation that the district pay for that.
Okay, so your view, as I understand it, is that the bill as now written deals only with sort of the most challenged districts, and that the existing law, state and federal, provides for transportation for youngsters to move from those most challenged districts to other districts as well.
Within federal funds currently.
If I could make just a slight correction to that, and that is that if state law permits it. Okay. And so this language would create the permissiveness for then under the corrective action criteria for the state education agency to take that as one of the corrective actions that has to be taken in combination with at least several others that are listed that are the same that are listed in the race to the top. So it's this action that allows through rulemaking and action by the SEA to tap into those funds.
There was quite a bit of discussion and debate around, and sort of chatter in my world at least, around the standards issue and whether or not by essentially moving towards national standards we were in some way reducing our own good, rigorous standards in California. Just sort of generally, could somebody explain that debate a little bit more to me? Because that was a piece that, frankly, I didn't get as good a handle on as I would like.
So currently there's a consortia working on a new set of standards. Right now, California and Massachusetts have what everybody considers the highest standards in the nation. And so you're compared to all the other 50 states. And so they're trying to develop a set of standards that is intended to help students by the time they graduate succeed in college or careers, whatever they choose.
Excuse me, Ms. Jorgensen, when you say they, you mean the group working at the national level?
There's the National Governors Association. There's several people. We do have a request into the Secretary for Education to allow states that meet or exceed whatever they develop to be allowed to maintain or adopt the standards that at least meet our standards, and states are allowed to adopt additional standards individually, but the concept here is to have a basis to compare every state to each other, because right now we all have whatever each state adopts.
Is it your understanding or that what we have in front of us would allow us to still maintain our own rigorous high standards while supporting the drive for common or for standards across the country?
We actually, that's an area that the Office of the Secretary addressed. We would like to add some amendments to make it clear that the Academic Standards Committee be allowed to review the Common Core standards that are adopted with the end goal of still adopting the 85%, but enhancing those to ensure that we at least maintain our rigor of the standards that we have now.
And is that an amendment that the author has committed to take?
Yes. Yes.
Great, thank you. Then, effective date. The effective date of this measure would be what, given our special session?
It depends on what the vote tally is, but again, there's majority vote versus 2/3. So again, would be 90 days. It's your extraordinary special session. If we were to finish it up, session is adjourned. We can't. We have to adjourn the special session. Get it going, and then it's 90 days.
The reason I'm asking is I've expressed concern before, and I still have the concern about. I understand it's race to the top, not stroll to the top. On the other hand, if we're going to race to the top, I'd like to do it in an orderly and thoughtful way. We've got some dates in the bill about by what date various students or their families have to apply for certain things. So when do we anticipate that real school districts with real kids would be subject to the provisions of all this?
Practically speaking, I would think in terms of the ability for parents to transfer, it would likely to be orderly. It will be next fall, starting in September. But some schools are year-round, so it'll just depend on the situation. But once the 90 days is up, if we assume it's the we don't get 2/3, then it'll be 90 days after that. Then these laws become effective, and at that point, I think folks have the ability to exercise the right.
The reason I ask is, as I was looking through this, I thought there were some things that needed to happen by January 1. Looking at page 4, an application requesting a transfer pursuant to this article shall be submitted by the parent of a pupil to the school district of enrollment prior to January 1 of the school year preceding the school year for which the pupil is requesting a transfer.
Right. So part of the development of the state plan and looking at what's in the bill and what ultimately passes, the superintendent and the board will be able to do the necessary calculations to determine who those are, who those districts are. And so while, on a permissive basis, they can notify those either persistently lowest achieving schools that you are on that list based on the law that the legislature passes. Based on that criteria, you have been identified as those schools. So that notice can happen, and I think the idea is the sooner that the districts know who they are, the better able they are to plan for what might come down the road.
If you don't mind me
Sure, please.
Briefly, I think he's referring to a different notice, which is a notice to the parent to the district that they want to transfer to. And that can be waived by the receiving district. So some students could transfer next fall, but that notice process could take place in time.
Okay. There was a discussion about 50% of the funds being local as opposed to 80% of the funds being local. I'm just curious what your take on this is.
I believe, and I was trying to find that when somebody raised that there is intent language that we prioritize that more than half of the money go to the LEAs. I think there is so much work that needs to be done with the standards, with the assessments, with other areas that what's in there in terms of the 50% is what the federal law requires, but I can tell you from at least the finance perspective, we always support giving as much money to the locals as possible.
Catherine Gaither, Governor's Office of Education. If I could just address how we're currently approaching the state plan. The funding that we get from Race to the Top, we won't know how much that is until we know how many LEAs are signing on with us as partners. 50% of whatever amount we get must go out to Title I eligible districts and schools. Not every district that participates will be Title I eligible. So another fair amount of the funds we get for Race to the Top will go to LEAs and schools that are not Title I eligible. So we don't know the percentage until we know the proportion of schools that are partnering with us in this venture. Additionally, there will be, as Ms. Oropeza indicated, costs associated with the growth model that needs to be provided to the LEAs, formative assessment items that we've committed as part of our portion of the MOU to provide to LEAs. So there's a number of things that funds will be spent on. What we're not going to do is create a new state bureaucracy. I can pretty much guarantee you that.
Thank you. Then,
and Senator Simon, if I can just say, on page 7D, it says it is the intent of the legislature that funding for local educational agencies be the highest priority in the allocation of Race to the Top program funds. 53101D.
I don't have a strongly held opinion on that. I just would like to know what the lay of the land is. Now I have some very specific questions to go back to our earlier robust discussion about possible amendments. But let me start with this sort of question. Senator Romero helped me a little bit if I said to you, how much discretion do you want the local district to have that is the district of enrollment, the receiving district? I mean,
This is under the open enrollment?
Yeah.
I would go back to, in terms of the receiving district, once again, it is, the intent here is to say the receiving district determines its own, this is our, I said financial, you said its capacity. To me, I'm using them interchangeably. We indicated we can clarify that, specify it.
Right.
It's the local district decides, but the point is that it has to be clear. It has to be stated. We should not tolerate discrimination. And there was a big debate in districts of choice about cherry picking, and we shouldn't. So that's what that is. Whatever the local decides, just say it so we all know.
All right. Let me ask you about 3 or 4 specific requests I have for amendments and see if you're willing to take them. I believe earlier Ms. Oropeza indicated it was the intention that all districts would receive the 70% of revenue limit, even if they were not revenue limit districts. I don't think they should have to declare themselves district of choice in order to access those funds. Would you be willing to commit to an amendment that specifically provides that 70% is authorized in your bill so that they don't have to access it through the provisions of another bill and another program?
Does it bring your vote?
I got a couple more.
How about put them all on the table?
All right, then I would like to see specific language indicating that in 48356A, which you referenced earlier, which is on page 4, regarding the specific written standards for acceptance and rejection, that in addition to the language that the standards may include consideration of the capacity of a program, class, grade level, or school building, all of which is your existing language, that adverse financial impact be included as well. Now, I thought there was a legitimate concern expressed earlier about making sure that that language can't be used to turn away students who would be special education students, for example, or so that clearly is not our goal, and I understand that, and I think you've got some coverage there on page 5 in subparagraph D, where you mentioned that the districts of enrollment have to ensure that pupil enrollment pursuant to the standards are that there's an unbiased process that prohibits evaluation of whether or not the pupil should be enrolled based on his or her individual academic or athletic performance. If you wanted to strengthen that up in concert with some language indicating that adverse financial impact could be a consideration so that it can't be used to turn away particular categories of kids, I get that. But that would be the second ask that I would have. Then we get to this issue of what the process is, and the standard by which the decision gets made if somebody says no. And here's the problem. If somebody says no, and it's a perfectly righteous denial, but somebody then steps up, either an individual or organization, and says, we're going to sue you to the tune of $250,000 worth of legal costs to make the case, you're in a situation where every district in the state can then be leveraged to say, the hell with it, I'll take the kid, rather than put up with the legal costs. So I think we need to have some kind of standard. Again, this goes to the fact that local school districts are not legislative bodies within the conventional sense, and therefore subject to a different kind of review by the courts. If we had language that said that the decision of the Board of Education with respect to individual applicants will be deemed final in the absence of a determination that the exercise of their authority was arbitrary or capricious, which is a phrase that is often used in other determinations. So obviously, if a school board exercises its, quote, judgment in a fashion that is arbitrary or capricious, then somebody ought to be able to say, shame on you, we're not putting up with that. That being said, we don't want every difference of opinion to end up being a lawsuit. I don't think that serves the receiving districts well, but I ultimately don't think it serves the students who would hope to enter those districts well if everybody starts to lawyer up instead of figuring out how to make this process work. So that would be the third request I would make in terms of amendments. And well, I do think clarification about the appeal process in the bill is important. And again, I think if we can say, I'm less focused on what that appeals process might look like, as long as we have what I consider reasonable standard about the board's exercise of discretion. And if the phrase arbitrary and capricious is acceptable to you, and you can work that into the bill as the third and final amendment, then to answer your earlier focused question, yes, that would earn my vote. Those amendments would earn my vote.
That's a carrot I'll take. Let me go ahead and say is that I think we can get there. Let me just say that I would like to work with you, work with your staff. I commit to saying let's see if we can get there. I think we can, Senator Simitian. Now, can I say right now on the 70%? I mean, I don't know. I've got to go back and check numbers overall. I think we made it clear that capacity, financial, I think that's pretty clear. I believe we can get to. On the presses, Districts of Choice doesn't have an appeals process. Is that correct? Right. So we'd have to go back and take a look at it.
Intra does.
Yeah, for an intra do, and District of Choice does not.
So, but I think we can take a look at it because to figure out, can we get there?
Again, I'm Senator Lewis. I think we're both focusing on process and standard. I think Senator Lewis is focusing more on process. I'm focusing more on whatever the process is. The ultimate question is, who's got how much of a burden. And, I don't want to be in a position where somebody says, well, we have a difference of opinion and you lose. That's not, I want to be able to say, look, the board got elected. They get to make this decision. They have to have some standards. They got to put them in place. We've talked about tightening up those standards on financial impact. But then, as I said, I don't want every difference of opinion to be the basis for a lawsuit. I want to know that if they have acted in their own best judgment as the locally elected board, that unless someone makes a determination it's arbitrary and capricious, that we're done.
If it's acceptable to you, since there's a commitment to bring the bill back, we will commit to work on all of these issues and, as the Senator said, resolve them hopefully in the way that address your concerns and Senator Liu's concerns, and they will come back to you again.
Well, I think because we are in our second or third, depending on how you want to count, we'll get back to you on this. I need to press you just a little bit more, Senator, I understand that we don't want to try and draft it today in real time in the committee. I get that. But I'm hearing you commit out loud in committee for the record that financial impact will be one of the criteria for as adverse financial impact will be one of the criteria for
the words financial impact. Yes.
Okay.
Financial, the financial, yes.
Okay. And then I'm hearing you commit as well to putting some standard in place that ensures that the district is not subject to frivolous litigation on the standard of approval.
Yes.
And then I'm also hearing you commit to making sure that there is specific language on funds flowing with students, and that we're not expecting districts to receive students for whom they don't receive funds, and that they aren't going to have to go declare themselves a district of choice to do that. I've deliberately left out a number there, although I can't imagine it should be a different number than we see in districts of choice. But right now you got 100 districts out of 1,000 who say, I don't see any money flowing here with the kid. And if you want them to take the kid, you got to put the money following the kid.
You have to. Yes. I think I have to take it back, that piece. But
can we commit to work with you on that and go back and take a look at what can be done?
Yeah. Do I have good, firm commitments on the other two items if I'm going to
yes.
find a little love on that one? All right. Thanks. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Senator.
Race to the compromise, as I said.
Senator Padilla.
On that last point, I think it's just a matter of, I heard the staff response to your question earlier, and they said, well, existing law makes it clear enough, and I think what Senator Simitian is requesting a reaffirmation of that, if that is the case.
What I also heard the staff say through the chair, if I may, is that existing law makes that clear in terms of the 70% figure if you opt to be a district of choice. My point is, there may be other consequences that flow from opting to be a district of choice, and I don't want somebody to have to say, I declare myself a district of choice just to get the money that I think everybody agrees should follow the kid anyway.
Okay.
Thank you. I'm sorry to interrupt, sir.
A series of questions on a couple of different areas. If we can just, I guess, go through in sequence of the bill in print on page 5. Near the top, when we're talking about the priority for pupils that may be seeking a transfer, first priority for the siblings of children who are already attending the desired school. Second priority for pupils transferring from a program improvement school ranked in decile 1. If I follow this conversation, I thought our goal, our purpose for doing all of this, our priority, if you will, are the students in those low-performing schools. Why would they not be ranked first in priority order here?
I think that the intent...
And I'm sorry. Senator, I don't know if Senator Romero wants to first crack at the answer before deferring to
I'm going to
staff.
go ahead and allow Jeannie to answer that, please.
I think the intent is here, we're making the assumption that these students are from the decile, but if you have a sibling that already is in there, we want to make sure the sibling gets priority over somebody that doesn't have a sibling already in that, that school. But
I would hope that's the case too. That's the spirit with which I'm entertaining it. But I can see how somebody else would view this as, well, here's just an easy way to reunite my kids here to make carpooling easier. At the expense from a capacity standpoint, because we only have a finite number of seats of the students that we're really trying to help. So I'd ask the author to sort of revisit that, give that some additional consideration to maybe fine-tune the language here to reflect what I believe the goal and the purpose is of this legislation. On the same page, further down, section 48.359, each school district is encouraged to keep an accounting of all the requests made for alternative attendance, along with, number of requests granted, denied, withdrawn, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Why just encourage the school districts and not mandate the school districts to keep such records, particularly if we've already expressed a concern of the potential for reasons of bias or anything else, requests to be denied or otherwise students being treated inequitably?
That was a decision made simply for eliminate the mandated cost. We hope that, in fact, districts do maintain records largely for the reasons that Senator Simitian indicated, so if lawsuits arise and so forth, but it was simply a fiscal decision to minimize the cost of this program.
So we either pay on the front end or pay on the back end. Just below that, section B of that, part B of that same section, the information maintained pursuant to subdivision A may be reported to the governing board of the school district at a regularly scheduled meeting of the governing board. Again, no reporting requirement, just a may report to the governing board. I assume that was a conscious decision. Reason being?
Again, fiscal, but it's also if you mandate a report, then you're mandating rather than encouraging the collection of data. So they're linked together in terms of the structure.
Will the record keeping and or whether or not the information is reported to the governing board of the school, does that fall into the scope of the interim program report and the final program report that we talked about earlier in 2012 and 2014?
Right now it has a series, a working group that determines what all's in that evaluation. We haven't yet contemplated everything in there, but we can clearly keep that in mind.
Well, again, part of my comfort level here is being driven by, how much of this we hope happens versus how much we are requiring to happen. And that's just at the local level. I mean, none of this is being required to be communicated or shared with state representatives either. on page 7 of the bill. At the top, first line, the superintendent and the president of the state board may enter into a memorandum of understanding with a local educational agency. Am I to interpret that as this is now an optional program? Districts can choose or not choose to participate? That's correct.
Go ahead. The Race to the Top. Race to the Top is an optional program for LEAs, and we hope that as many as possible will join, but is definitely voluntary.
Oh.
Race to the Top.
And I put it out there. Obviously, we have people in attendance and not in attendance who are on both sides of this bill. So for better or for worse, this is an optional program. There's folks out there who are so much for this bill, they wish it was a requirement of every district in the state. But for those who are here with concerns about this bill and the sky is going to fall, just a recognition for our benefit that this is an optional program for all the school districts. Let's jump to page 9 of the bill. We've seen at the top the 4 models for consideration: the turnaround model, the restart model, the school closure model, the transformation model. There was a reference early in the discussion earlier that there may be yet a 5th, much more broadly described alternative for action. Is that somewhere on this page and I'm just not seeing it, or where would we find that?
It's a 5%.
These are the 5% schools. These are the 5% of the lowest performing. It's the other larger group that would be subject to. These are the ones that are required by federal law and the guidelines that are referenced just above this in the preamble to that list.
So that broader option applies to the non-bottom 5%, but still by graduation rate or otherwise.
To the parent
petition.
Got it. Thank you. That's actually very, very helpful. Not a specific page number. One of the references is on the top of page 10. To the extent that federal funds are made available, other portions of the program, to the extent that the state budgets in its or appropriates through its Budget Act, implementation of Race to the Top. Are there provisions that allow or prohibit private sources of funding for a school district to reach these objectives or to implement the program?
Absolutely not. We are very hopeful that foundations will be participating. We know of a consortium of charter schools that does have a foundation grant, and we are very hopeful that they will be coming in as one of our partner groups in Race to the Top. So we know that LEAs are getting foundation help, and we encourage them to do so.
Do we need to explicitly state that in this?
I don't think you need to explicitly state it in the bill. It's not prohibited in the education code, and we have specifically included it in our
Well, there's a lot of things that aren't explicitly prohibited in the education code that aren't happening. So there was a desire by the folks behind this bill to put this.
I would indicate that this is clear in the regulation. There's a lot of different documents here. It's clear in the regulations. To some extent, how much do we put into the bill? I think if we want to stay that we can repeat what's in the regulations, but a lot of this is cross-referenced, and we have the regulations. This is what's I don't.
Just trying to be helpful here.
I mean, my preference actually be that I think it's clear as it is. So if we want to add another line in here, I don't think it's necessary. I think for those who are actually working this, know this, and it's clear there.
Okay.
But I mean, if you want us to spell it out.
Well, I offer that up for your consideration. That's your choice as the author of the bill. A question to Senator Romero. As a whole, taken as a whole, this bill, how does it help or hurt disproportionately students classified as English language learners, given that such a big percentage of our student population in the state and in the school district that serves your district and mine? You want to comment on that?
This Race to the Top, and as we move forward, I believe will absolutely help English language learner students in California. Remember, I pointed to this scroll. 571 schools, 86% Latino and African American students. In fact, 75% of the students are Latino students. You know, in Los Angeles, overwhelmingly English language learner students. Some parts of LA Unified are some 65% English language learner students. To a large extent, you can't really even take out, when you talk about Latino students, we are talking about English language learner students. And when we take a look at the lowest performing deciles in California. So to talk about education in California, and why we I think in growth as well, is capturing the demography of California has changed. It is challenging. Language acquisition is key. English language learners are key. I fundamentally believe that the President and the Secretary, in calling for us to do, as they said, drastic things, and the Secretary coming from Illinois and Chicago specifically, we are talking to a large extent about the opportunities for English language learner students. LA Unified took a position on this bill. And they, as you know, and you see in Los Angeles, whether it's Ms. Martinez in the Valley or Ms. Garcia downtown, absolutely, when we talk about the achievement, it's part and parcel of English language learner students.
Okay. Couple comments just in closure. I won't call her back up, but I was listening to the representative from CTA when she was up here earlier, and she made a comment that, yet again, we're trying to blame teachers for the failures of the public school system. I didn't get that from today's conversation, committee discussion, or debate. I certainly don't get that from reading the bill in front of us. So I was saddened to hear that remark, but wanted to just assure her and others that that's not where I'm coming from in this. My final comment is this. I mentioned at the beginning that details matter. I think this has been a constructive committee consideration of the bill. In the testimony and elsewhere, we hear example after example throughout the state of failures. And that's why we need drastic action. We'll also hear story after story of successes in different districts and within districts. And so therefore, we shouldn't take too drastic of an action. That's life. It's always a combination of both. I think part of our responsibility, we're not entertaining a bill that will apply only to Palo Alto or only to the LA Unified School District or only to anywhere else. Our responsibility here as members of the state Senate are to do what's in the best interest of California as a whole. And if we were to measure or look at our performance of our public school system in aggregate as a state, then yes, we're failing. And so this not may be the silver bullet for public education in the state, but if status quo is the alternative, then this should be, if not a step in the right direction, maybe just a kick in the pants in a direction that we need to be moving in for the benefit of the state and for the benefit of our kids. So I know it's not a final product, but I will be supportive of the bill today.
Any other questions? Senator Weiland?
I just briefly want to say that I, too, have some questions that I haven't gotten into today, and I won't. I do think it's important as the agreement to bring the bill back to committee, and I think some of us may want to weigh in if we get it out of the Senate, hopefully on the Assembly side for consideration. And just one other comment regarding Senator Padilla's comment about teachers. I agree. I don't see the bill blaming teachers, but I do think it's important when we talk about education reform on across the spectrum. Sometimes there's the implication that teachers themselves are at fault, and I really don't believe that. I think what we're trying to do is come up with reforms that will work. I know lots of teachers who they're looking for best practices. If I'm teaching a class of English language learners, and it's incredible that there's not a standard pedagogy to do that, if someone else knows how to do it better, I want to learn how to do that. So let's move forward.
If I can just add as well, too, I think absolutely it's not about blaming teachers. I think, if anything, if you look at it even from improving the workplace conditions, I think it's a win-win for the parent, for the teacher, for the children. And I'll go back to it overall, at least as I look at the call for Raise to the Top. It is about saying, let's take a look at saying that this list, it's running the system, but we've got to hold those who run and manage the system accountable. Teachers, I believe, will benefit from having schools that are performing well, from teachers that are engaged, from kids. And you're right, it's not a silver bullet. But it's one where I think and I know teachers have heard it, we respect, we value, we count. We've said parents are our partners. Teachers are our partners and our education leaders. So I look at this as an opportunity to showcase the best that we have in California, and teachers are certainly amongst the best of what we have.
Senator Liu.
Just to kind of bring this all full circle here, I want to appreciate the discussion, the time that we've taken, this committee taken to discuss this bill, even without an analysis. I think I appreciate both Senator Simitian's and Senator Padilla's questioning and making sure that we do dot the I's and cross the T's, and that the bill does come back. And it is a concept that is too important for us to just drop here in the Senate committee. And I, too, will be supporting it coming out of this committee, but wanting to make sure that we do the right thing for all of our kids.
Thank you. Any other questions, comments up here? Then I shall say something and weigh in, because I've been very quiet during this. First of all, I appreciate my I appreciate my colleagues' rigorous debate and the questions. And perhaps it's we didn't have an analysis ahead of time, but I think we vetted it through this, probably with a more rigorous debate than we normally do. But it was healthy, and I think the outcome has been good. As a joint author of SB 5X1, which passed out of here, my staff has worked closely with Senator Romero's staff and the rest of the players here. So, there weren't a lot of surprises here, other than, some of the changes that happened from SBX 5.1 to now. I feel they're watering down, but I still think it's a step forward, and I still support this bill. It's not perfect, but what comes out of here that is perfect, and it is the art of compromise, of finding the common ground, so we can move the state forward, and particularly for our kids. The don't blame the teachers is something I would comment on. I think you've already talked about that. Somebody kept saying this is one-time money. It's not one-time money. I mean, we have heard from Secretary Duncan that this is the first funding of money, and there will be other money down the road. So we need to get this thing worked out so that, yes, it's one-time money now, but it's expected to have more money down the road. But more importantly, the money helps, because we're going to have some tough cuts, happening. And we had backfilled education last year with stimulus funds that won't necessarily be available this year. So I think this funding is important. But more importantly, it's about the reform included that is the carrot for us to be even having this discussion. And we're failing our students. We absolutely have to be thinking about this from the top and setting up the policy and the structure where we as decision makers are making the decisions that give the students and parents choices. And it's not working now. So the real question is, what's the downside of not doing this? I mean, it hadn't been working, and I believe this is a step in the right direction. It's not perfect. We'll be making changes down the road, if not in the Assembly, maybe a couple of years down the road when we're looking at the evaluation of how it's working. But I believe it is a step in the right direction, and we just have to do better. This is a mechanism to do that, so I certainly be supporting this, and do appreciate all the input. And I tried to allow everybody an opportunity to speak, not only here but in the public. And it took a little while. This does have to go to appropriations still. They're waiting for this. I know there's members that have planes. I don't know how that impacts us, with the rest of the day. But I'm willing to change my plans for whatever's necessary to get this worked out. Thank you very much. You can have a brief close or call for vote. All right. Is there a motion?
Move the bill.
We have a motion. Would you please call the roll?
Romero. Aye. Romero, aye. Huff.
Aye.
Huff, aye. Alquist. Hancock. Liu. Aye. Liu, aye. Maldonado. Aye. Maldonado, aye. Padilla.
Aye.
Padilla, aye. Simitian. Aye. Simitian, aye. Weiland.
Aye.
Weiland, aye. 7-0.
Very good. There being no further business, this meeting is adjourned.